Chapter 637. Where to Fight the Tiger Wasn't Wrong. The Heavenly Sword's ultimate skill couldn't help the military governor to be immune to the freezing effect. However, he didn't expect the Snow Lady's snowballs to also have a ballistic skill that had a flight time. The snowballs launched from the hands of the Snow Ladies also had a certain speed. What if the military governor's movement speed was faster than the snowball's flight speed? Then these snowballs would all chase after the military governor. As long as the military governor moved in a zigzag pattern, even the snowballs that were originally shot at him would never be able to catch up to the military governor. Previously, when he fought the tiger lured the monsters, he lured a lot of Snow Ladies behind him. However, when the military governor lured the monsters, he lured the Snow Lady's snowballs behind him. The military governor, who was riding on Claw Huang Feidian's heroic form, moved faster than the speed of sound. Although he attracted the attacks of countless Snow Ladies, none of their snowballs could even get close to the military governor. Naturally, they couldn't freeze the military governor. The military governor used such a miraculous method to achieve the same effect as Where to Fight the Tiger with his incredible speed that even the ballistic attack couldn't catch up to. However, it was useless just to not be frozen. The heroic form only lasted for 10 seconds. After 10 seconds, the military governor who had lost Claw Huang Feidian wouldn't be able to outrun the ballistic attack. Therefore, the military governor only had 10 seconds to attack. Within 10 seconds, the military governor had to kill more than 53 Snow Ladies. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to win against Where to Fight the Tiger. Of course, the military governor didn't know the result of Where to Fight the Tiger. Naturally, he didn't know that he only needed to kill 53 Snow Ladies. Can the military governor kill 53 Snow Ladies in 10 seconds? Where to Fight the Tiger thought seriously. After thinking for a while, he felt that it was impossible. Even the fiery sword's ultimate skill required a 30-second channeling time. But at that moment, that tiger suddenly heard a deafening cheer from the surrounding audience, jolting that tiger out of his thoughts. He instinctively glanced at the screen, and then saw a scene that he would never forget for the rest of his life. On the ground of the battle space, a flower that resembled a glazed chrysanthemum flower began to bloom with the admiral at its center. A total of 64 streaks of golden sword intent formed this extremely rare glazed chrysanthemum flower, and all of the snow maidens that came into contact with the sword intent withered under the golden petals, turning into tiny crystalline water droplets that fell to the ground. Meanwhile, the kill count was increasing at an astonishing rate of over 100 per second. When the military governor's ultimate skill ended, the chrysanthemum disappeared, and the kill count instantly froze at 2,500. Upon seeing this, Where to Fight the Tiger finally understood why the military governor was willing to be frozen. It was all for these 10 seconds of glory. 10 seconds later, 20 minutes had just passed. The admiral returned to the arena in a daze. The number 1254 and 2500 were lined up side by side. The result was already very obvious. Military governor, I accept my loss wholeheartedly. Where to Fight the Tiger was indeed convinced of his loss. He probably wouldn't be able to unleash such a dazzling flower in his lifetime. Therefore, he walked up to the military governor and bowed deeply to the military governor to express his admiration. Thank you for letting me win. Your strategy was brilliant. If it wasn't for the uniqueness of the heavenly sword, I would have lost to you today. Gohan nodded at Where to Fight the Tiger. This person was quite smart. If possible, it would be best for him to join his army in the future. Thank you, Mr. Military Governor. Where to Fight the Tiger bowed again. Then, a hint of pride appeared on his face. Mr. Military Governor, I wonder what skill you used just now. Can you enlighten me? I don't think the Heavenly Sword has this ability. I feel like the skill of a Celestial Sword Maiden is only SOSO. This skill is called Abyssal Golden Chrysanthemum. It's a skill that I created myself. It's not a skill of any Sword Maiden. Gohan only replied this one sentence before he stopped trembling. No matter where he went to fight the tiger, he naturally knew that it was impossible for the other party to explain his trump card to him clearly. So, he could only bow again, ignore the host who ran over to interview him, and directly disappeared from the arena. Abyssal Golden Chrysanthemum was actually a name that Gohan had thought of on the spot. As the name suggested, it was a variant of the 9 swords of mysterious heaven, Abyssal Sword. At the same time, 64 sword auras of different strengths could be unleashed in 64 different directions. The direction and strength of the sword auras were different. Therefore, after using it, it would form a beautiful scene like a golden chrysanthemum. However, Gohan didn't do this for the sake of beauty. This way, all Yuan-ko within a relatively large area would be attacked by 3 sword auras. If the sword auras weren't arranged according to the golden chrysanthemum pattern, then the 64 sword auras would at most cause Yuan-ko to be attacked once within the same area. Some readers would raise doubts. Snow Maiden was a Dragon Realm Yuan-ko. In terms of stats, she was stronger than the military governor himself. How could she be killed by a single sword aura? That didn't make sense. In fact, it was very logical. First of all, Snow Maidens had the least health among all the Dragon Realm Yuan-ko. They were even weaker than some Tiger Realm Yuan-ko. Secondly, Gohan's sword auras were unleashed under the Heavenly Sword's heroic mode. Therefore, the sword auras were wrapped in a layer of gold. Otherwise, the sword auras would be invisible under normal circumstances. Meanwhile, the Plum Wine heroic mode allowed all attacks to ignore defense and had a chance to deal a heroic strike, which dealt 1000% heroic damage to the enemy. One could imagine how terrifying the damage caused by such an effect was. Moreover, every Snow Maiden was attacked by 3 sword auras at once. It was not surprising that they were killed instantly. Congratulations, Mr. Military Governor. Although there were many twists and turns, it seems like you didn't encounter any difficulties. The host said with a smile, Mr. Military Governor, there's no need to draw lots for your next opponent. It's Mr. Long Yu, the champion of the famous sword tournament. Now, let's welcome Mr. Long Yu to the arena. A bright light erupted from the arena. Then, a figure that Gohan was somewhat familiar with appeared on the arena. Long Yu, who was defeated by the military governor in the King Arthur's betrayal dungeon, was now standing opposite Gun. Speaking of which, this was the first time the two of them were facing each other as opponents. Military Governor, it's been a long time. Long Yu had mixed feelings when he saw the military governor standing opposite him. He had been watching the entire tournament from the lounge, and he had been in a state of confusion throughout the entire process. Initially, he had hoped that the military governor would be able to fight his way to him so that he could defeat him with his own hands. However, on the other hand, he was a little afraid when he saw the military governor's battles. If he, the champion of the famous sword tournament, lost to the champion of the treasured sword tournament, there would be an indelible demon in his heart for the rest of his life. Mr. Long Yu, now that the challenger is standing in front of you, do you have anything to say to our audience? The host stood in front of Long Yu and asked a customary question. I don't have anything to say. Hurry up and start the battle. Long Yu said stiffly and didn't look at the host again. The host felt very awkward. He could only look at the military governor, hoping that the military governor would say something. Unfortunately, the military governor didn't even look at him. Instead, he focused his attention on Long Yu. The host could only put on a fake smile and say some nonsense to himself. Then, he disappeared from the arena and announced the start of the battle. At that moment, most of the players were staring at the entire tournament. They were holding their lottery tickets in their hands. According to the statistics, 65% of the players had placed their bets on the military governor defeating Long Yu. As long as the military governor won, they would be able to keep their cute little money. Therefore, they were very interested in the outcome of this match. Long Yu took a deep breath and took out a pitch-black heavy sword from its scabbard. It's the obsidian heavy sword. Although Gohan had seen the obsidian heavy sword once in Long Yu's previous match, he couldn't help but feel happy when he saw the obsidian heavy sword again. If it was possible, Gohan was willing to give up his Juzi sword in hopes of obtaining the obsidian heavy sword. After all, the obsidian heavy sword was a godly item in every sword owner's heart. The obsidian heavy sword was pitch black and emitted a faint red glow. This was the unique characteristic of the obsidian heavy sword. Obsidian was a godly metal refined from meteorites in the sky. It was the most precious treasure in the world. It was difficult to refine one tael of obsidian from a meteorite that weighed 1 ton. Moreover, the obsidian heavy sword was extremely heavy. Just by looking at its size, one would think that the obsidian heavy sword was a small sword for girls. However, it actually weighed as much as 64 kilograms. It was even heavier than some huge sword. The reason why Gohan was willing to give up his Juzi sword in hopes of obtaining the obsidian heavy sword was that the obsidian heavy sword was one of the swords that belonged to the sword devil, Duguchubai. The flood-level Yuan Ko looked like an ordinary sword owner because he carried 4 swords with him. His image was similar to a spirit sword owner. A sword owner had a sword mother as their foundation. Naturally, their swordsmanship was the most important. In the past 1,000 years, there had been countless famous sword owners. Among them, there was no lack of outstanding people who were unrivaled in the world with a single sword. However, in the hundreds of years when the sword devil, Duguchubai, was unrivaled, there wasn't a single sword owner who was able to exchange more than 30 moves with him. Yuan Ko, who was obsessed with swords, was worthy of his title as the sword devil. No matter if it was the sword owner or the sword owner, Yuan Ko, none of them were his match. Even drifting goblet Jiendi of the Lionian family, who had mastered the billion sword technique to the acme of perfection, was defeated after 30 moves with Duguchubai and willingly admitted defeat. According to the estimation of the later generations, unless Kanzu or Zhetian came back to life, it was impossible for anyone to defeat Duguchubai. It was said that when Duguchubai competed in swordsmanship, it was because of his choice of sword. Normally, he would use a wooden sword to fight his enemies. When he met a sword owner, he would use a nameless sharp sword. When he met a contemporary expert, he would use the purple myrtle flexible sword. This last obsidian heavy sword would only be unsheathed when he fought against an invincible sword owner. In the years when Duguchubai was born, the obsidian heavy sword had been unsheathed 3 times. All of the battles were against 3 contemporary invincible Jiendi masters. He won all 3 battles and became famous throughout the world. Chapter 638. The Lady Obsidian Heavy Sword had appeared in this world almost at the same time as Duguchubai. The second year after the Obsidian Heavy Sword had been found by humans, Duguchubai's name had started to spread. Hence, there was a saying that the Obsidian Heavy Sword had brought Duguchubai to this world. However, what people did not understand was that although Duguchubai was a flood-level Yuan Ko that was on par with Jiendi, his strongest Lady Obsidian Heavy Sword was only a famous sword. That was something that people could not understand. Logically, even if Duguchubai's sword was not the Lady Emperor sword, it should be the Lady Fairy sword. However, the reality was that the Obsidian Heavy Sword was only a famous sword. What was even more unbelievable was the Obsidian Heavy Sword's skills. That was because the 4 skills of the Obsidian Heavy Sword were all passive skills. There was not a single active skill. Martial skill. Obsidian Heavy Sword. The weight of the Obsidian Heavy Sword ignores the strengthening effect of the Lady Sword's body. Basic skill. Edgeless Heavy Sword. The Obsidian Heavy Sword has a 30% chance to cause dizziness. However, it is unable to cause bleeding or slashing effect. Passive skill. Great ingenuity. The Obsidian Heavy Sword has a chance to break the opponent's weapon, depending on the quality of the opponent's weapon. Advanced skill. Nothing can stop. The obsidian heavy sword can absorb the durability of the opponent's weapon to recover the energy of its own personal shield. Ultimate skill. Invincible technique. The obsidian heavy sword's attack has a sure hit effect. It cannot be missed, but it can be blocked. Those were the 4 skills of the obsidian heavy sword. All of them were passive skills. There was not a single active skill. This meant that when the obsidian heavy sword was used in battle, it would completely rely on the wielder's sword skills. There were no active skills that could be used. If it was in the hands of an ordinary wielder, this sword would be a piece of trash. Due to the unique martial characteristics of the recondite iron heavy sword, even an emperor sword wielder would find it extremely strenuous to wield it. A wielder who was not a sword master would not be able to wield such a heavy sword. Even if they only held it in their hands and waved it, they would feel weak in their limbs. They would instantly lose their ability to fight due to the exhaustion of their physical strength. However, in the hands of a sword owner like Gohan, the obsidian heavy sword was an absolute godly weapon. As long as they were good at using the passive skills, a sword owner with excellent sword skills could even use the obsidian heavy sword to fight an opponent that was 3 to 4 times stronger than them. If this sword was in Gohan's hands, Gohan would be Gohan. He was confident that he could even fight the U-class Yuan Ko alone. Gohan Wood Sword was a sword that obsidian black sword long E could sword. Black, heavy sword god. He as the sword class sword. I don't know if everyone still remembers that the heavenly sword has such a title. It is known as the number 1 sword mistress in the treasured sword tier. Similarly, among the famous sword ladies, recondite steel heavy sword was known as the number 1 sword lady in famous sword rank. The obsidian heavy sword's sword lady was taught by Duguchyobai. According to some sword owners who had fought with Duguchyobai, the obsidian heavy sword's sword skills were 40% of Duguchyobai's. What did that mean? Because of the obsidian heavy sword, there was no sword class first sword lady in the entire spirit sword level. There was no sword lady whose sword skills were a match for the obsidian heavy sword. Therefore, as long as the wielder could synchronize with the obsidian heavy sword, they could leave the battle to the obsidian heavy sword. They could just find a place to hide. Therefore, even though the obsidian heavy sword didn't have any active skills, it was still the 3rd sword class sword. If it wasn't for the first 2 being too abnormal, the obsidian heavy sword would be the deserving first place. When Gohan saw the obsidian heavy sword being released in front of him and becoming the obsidian heavy sword lady, Gohan couldn't help but feel excited. He even started to eagerly look forward to the battle. Because the obsidian heavy sword had 40% of Duguchyobai sword skills, could Gohan find a trace of Duguchyobai in the obsidian heavy sword? Should he have a battle that transcended time and space with this sword devil? The obsidian heavy sword lady wasn't a beautiful sword lady. In fact, it could be said that she was a little ugly. Because her skin was dark, her body was thick, and her muscles were bulging all over her body. If she covered her face, she would look like a strong man. However, Gohan could feel a strong power contained in her bulging muscles. "Who are you?" To Gohan's surprise, before the battle even began, the obsidian heavy sword lady suddenly put down the sword in her hand and looked at Gohan in confusion. "I am military governor, a player. I will also be your next opponent." Gohan answered seriously. "No, you are not a simple player. You have a familiar scent on you, but I can't recall it." The obsidian heavy sword lady thought for a moment but couldn't recall anything. In the end, she simply grinned and said, "Fine, it seems that my main body is missing some memories. Summon your sword lady. Let's fight to our heart's content." "No need. I will fight like this." Gohan raised the heaven-relieving sword in his hand and made an inviting gesture. "Huh? You are a sword master. And you are using heavenly." The recondite steel heavy sword recognized heavenly sword's origins with a single glance, and it could not help but laugh out loud. "Heavenly sword, that stupid woman, has finally appeared again. Among the famed swords, only that stupid woman's sword technique can exchange a few blows with me. Hey, military governor, are you sure you want to fight me? I advise you to let Heavenly come out. That way you will lose slower. Something happened to Heavenly, so she can't be released right now. Let me fight you, Obsidian Heavy Sword, Gohan said proudly. In that case, I will make my move. After saying that, the Lady of the Obsidian Iron Heavy Sword, who had been talking to Gohan just a moment ago, instantly sped up like a sports car. She charged at the commander and swung her sword at Gohan's head. It was worth mentioning that the Obsidian Heavy Sword was different from ordinary swords. Ordinary swords wished that their tip and blade were as sharp as possible. The sharper the sword, the better. That way they could cut through iron like it was mud and easily cut through the enemy's defense. However, the Obsidian Heavy Sword didn't have any sharpness. The edges on both sides of the sword were blunt, and the tip was round like a hemisphere. This was the origin of the Obsidian Heavy Sword's basic skill. Such a sword couldn't cause cutting damage to the enemy. It was more like a sledgehammer that dealt heavy damage. Therefore, the Obsidian Heavy Sword's first move was to smash Gohan's head. Clang! The heaven-relieving sword blocked the Obsidian Heavy Sword's blade and forcefully blocked the sure-kill attack. You brat! You have some skills. No wonder you dare to fight me. The Obsidian Heavy Sword let out a pleasantly surprised voice as if she was celebrating that she had such an opponent. However, as she was cheering, the Obsidian Heavy Sword didn't stop. Instead, it smashed at Gohan even more fiercely. Clang! 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 A back-and-forth battle unfolded on the stage. Both sides were absolute experts in swordsmanship, and they were both famed swordsmen. Moreover, both of them were using broad-minded swordsmanship styles. Every time their swords clashed, sparks would fly, and the sparks were as bright as fireworks in the dark night. After watching for less than half a minute, all the spectators felt as if their eyes were about to break. The two of them were too fast. Before the spectators could react to the first slash, the next 3 slashes were already over. The spectators had to move their eyeballs hundreds of times every minute just to keep up with the swords of both sides. In the spectators' eyes, the military governor and the Obsidian Heavy Sword seemed to have turned into 2 super-armored bumper cars. They kept smashing into each other, and the ground trembled along with their collisions. My eyes! Finally, one of the spectators couldn't take it anymore. His eyeballs instantly turned bloodshot, and there was even a trace of blood at the corner of his eye. The spectator quickly covered his eyes, and it took him quite some time to recover. Fortunately, this was a game, and his eyes could recover automatically. If this was the real world, the spectator would have to lie in the hospital for a night. The spectator who covered his eyes was only a signal. More and more spectators covered their eyes. Their eyes might not be bleeding, but they couldn't hold on any longer. They had to close their eyes and rest for a while. You're amazing, much more amazing than I imagined. After a clash, the Obsidian Heavy Sword took the initiative to retreat a dozen steps, widening the distance between her and Gohan. Logically speaking, the best decision for Gohan to catch up to her and suppress her attacks was to prevent her from leaving the battle. However, Gohan didn't do so. Instead, he allowed her to widen the distance between them and regroup. You're amazing. I need to catch my breath. The Obsidian Heavy Sword's muscles were drenched in sweat. This was the reason why she had to leave the battle. She needed to recover some stamina. Similarly, on the other side, Gohan was also panting heavily, and his face was flushed. The Obsidian Heavy Sword's swordsmanship isn't bad either. I, the military governor, have learned a lot from it. Gohan wasn't referring to this guy. The Obsidian Heavy Sword's fighting style was very barbaric and reckless. It was a fighting style that Gohan had never encountered before. This was the first time Gohan had fought with such a fighting style. He had indeed learned a lot from the battle and could improve his swordsmanship a little more. No, you're better than me. I've shed 230 drops of sweat, but your clothes don't even have a speck of sweat. It's hard to believe that you're only using a treasured sword-level idiot like the heavenly sword." The obsidian heavy sword panted again. "I'm not the type to be stubborn. My swordsmanship isn't as good as yours. I admit defeat." What did she mean? She admitted defeat just like that? Upon hearing the obsidian heavy sword's words, Gohan couldn't understand. She had, at most, exhausted a little more stamina. She was far from admitting defeat. However, Dragon Feather, who had been hiding at the side, revealed a smile. The obsidian heavy sword was getting serious. "My swordsmanship lost, but that doesn't mean I've lost." The obsidian heavy sword raised her sword again. "Now I'll show you the swordsmanship left behind by Master Solitary." Chapter 639. It turned out the obsidian heavy sword wasn't using Duguchiobai's sword technique. A hint of understanding flashed through Gohan's mind. It was no wonder that even though the Lady of the Recondite Steel Heavy Sword's sword technique was powerful, Gohan was still unable to feel astonished. Gohan instinctively felt that this wasn't the sword technique of the sword devil, Duguchiobai. Although there weren't many people who could defeat this sword technique, they weren't the only ones. Watch carefully. I'll let you witness the unparalleled 9 swords of Duguchiobai, Sword Breaker. The Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword sneered and attacked again. The 9 swords of Duguchiobai was Duguchiobai's unique sword technique. It was known as the unparalleled sword technique that could break all weapons in the world. What a fast sword! Gohan saw a moving sword light from the corner of his eye. His heart went cold, and he swung the heavenly sword in his hand horizontally. Clang! As expected, Gohan blocked the Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword's sword. Although it was faster than the previous sword technique, there didn't seem to be anything special about it. Could this be the unparalleled 9 swords of Duguchiobai? Gohan had just thought of that when he felt a violent impact on his waist. His entire body was sent flying, and he landed heavily on the ground. The energy of the protective shield on his body was reduced by 1/5. Good! Dragon Feather clenched his fist. This was the first time Gohan had been hit since the start of the competition. F***CK. The military governor has been hit. What just happened? The spectators in the stands were in an uproar. They couldn't believe that the military governor, who had blocked every sword attack perfectly, couldn't block this one. He was sent flying like a burlap sack. How did this happen? Gohan, who crawled up from the ground, was also stunned. He had clearly blocked that sword just now, so why did it still hit him in the end? Gohan couldn't figure out what had happened. Do you still have the chance to be stunned? Lady Steel Heavy Sword's attack arrived again. This time, Gohan didn't choose to block it. Instead, he rolled backward a few times and dodged the sword. Before he could understand the solitary 9 swords, Gohan didn't plan on clashing with Lady Steel Heavy Sword. His personal shield couldn't withstand a few of Lady Steel Heavy Sword's swords. Can you dodge it? The Lady of Recondite Steel Heavy Sword sneered. She turned into a phantom, and the sky was instantly filled with sword shadows. No one knew which sword strike would be the deadliest. It seems like I've fallen into a disadvantage. Gohan smiled wryly. This solitary 9 swords was indeed powerful. Its pure swordsmanship might be even more powerful than the 9 swords of mysterious heaven. No wonder the sword demon, Duguchiobai, could use the solitary 9 swords to defeat all the heroes in the world. And so, a scene that the players had never imagined appeared on the battlefield. The powerful military governor was like a rabbit being chased around by the Lady of Recondite's Steel Heavy Sword. It was as if the Lady of Recondite's Steel Heavy Sword wanted nothing more than to grow 6 or 7 legs. The whole situation was extremely pathetic. Oh well, I can't lose here. If I use sword in the field from the 9 swords of mysterious heaven, I should be able to break her sword momentum, Gohan thought to himself as he ran. Recondite Steel Heavy Sword was not an undefeatable sword maiden. Based on the records of past battles, humans already knew how to deal with recondite steel heavy sword, which was a sword Maiden with such strong sword techniques, and that was to use endless long-range attacks to drown the sword Maiden. It wasn't that Gohan couldn't do this. As long as he used sword in the field first and then sword in the abyss, Gohan was 100% confident that he could defeat recondite steel heavy sword here. Sword in the field was a spell that could destroy the ground. It could turn the ground into a deep stone forest. In such an environment, the might of 9 swords beyond the swords would definitely be limited, and the Lady of Recondite steel heavy sword would also be limited. At that moment, as long as the military governor released hundreds of sword chis from sword in the abyss, Gohan believed that even the Lady of Recondite steel heavy sword would definitely die under his sword chis. But was such a victory really the one that Gohan wanted? This was not a victory of sword techniques, but a victory of sword chis. Gohan did not use the sword techniques that he was proud of to defeat his opponent. In this way, Gohan's confidence in his swordsmanship would be greatly affected. Once a swordsmanship expert like Gohan lost confidence in his swordsmanship and started to avoid using swordsmanship to defeat his opponent, it would undoubtedly create a huge inner demon in his heart. This inner demon might cause Gohan to be unable to improve his swordsmanship for the rest of his life. On the contrary, if Gohan could defeat the solitary 9 swords here, then his swordsmanship would definitely usher in a huge improvement. This improvement might allow Gohan's swordsmanship to enter a whole new realm. Fine, I'll just lose here. As he was fleeing, Gohan gritted his teeth and suddenly turned around. He did not flee. Instead, his heaven-reliant sword transformed into several tens of afterimages that resembled lotus flowers and attacked the Lady of Mysterious Steel heavy sword. Interesting. You're finally not running anymore? The Lady of Obsidian heavy sword cheered and clashed with Gohan again. However, this time, it was the military governor's turn to attack, while the Lady of Mysterious Steel heavy sword defended. In an instant, Gohan felt as though he had entered a completely selfless state. All the swordsmanship, experience, and techniques he had learned in his life had been mixed together, turning into a swordsmanship that even the military governor did not know what. He attacked the Lady of Mysterious Steel heavy sword all at once. What the hell is this? What a mess! The Lady of Mysterious Steel heavy sword let out a strange cry. Gohan's swordsmanship was too strange. She had never seen such a swordsmanship before. Even the sword breaker style, which was said to be able to break all the swordsmanship in the world, did not seem to be very useful in her hands. Ripples suddenly appeared on her protective shield from Gohan's attacks. As a result, the spectators covered their eyes again. Their eyes were unable to endure such an exciting battle. They could only keep rubbing their eyes in an attempt to ease the bloodshot exhaustion. When their eyes recovered, they realized that the two of them were no longer fighting. Instead, they were standing facing each other. Is the match over? Who won? A spectator anxiously asked the spectator next to him. Don't ask me. I don't know either. Didn't you see me rubbing my eyes just now? The spectator mumbled. Stop arguing. No one has lost yet, but it's going to be over soon. Just look at the screen and you'll know. It looks like the military governor is really going to fail miserably this time, another player said in a miserable tone. Another player said miserably. He had bought a 200,000 yuan lottery ticket, and it seemed like he was going to lose it all. The obsidian heavy sword was too powerful. It was ridiculously powerful. The two players quickly looked at the big screen. At that moment, the big screen was displaying the energy values of their opponent's personal shield. The Lady of Obsidian heavy sword's personal shield still had around 90% energy left. On the other side, the military governor's personal shield had fallen to 3%. With just one more gentle poke, the military governor would be defeated in an instant. More importantly, the heaven-reliant sword in the military governor's hand was in a mess. The obsidian heavy sword had the effect of destroying other weapons. As a result, Even though the personal shield of the heaven-reliant sword was still intact, the blade was already full of cracks. If the battle continued, the sword might very well shatter. You are very powerful. Your future is limitless. However, you are no match for me right now. You should just admit defeat. If the heaven-reliant sword breaks, it will be troublesome to repair it. The Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword advised with good intentions. However, when her words reached Gohan's ears, they sounded unusually harsh. You're right. The heaven-reliant sword can't continue fighting. Gohan nodded and sheathed the heaven-reliant sword. The personal shield on Gohan's body also disappeared. What did that mean? Could it be that the military governor had already decided to admit defeat? The spectators on the stands were in an uproar, but they immediately calmed down. Everyone could see that the admiral had used his swordsmanship to the extreme just now. Losing here was something that could not be helped. It was a pity that they had lost their bets. No, the military governor didn't admit defeat. A player suddenly shouted. At that moment, the personal shield on the surface of the military governor's body lit up again. This was a brand new personal shield with 100% energy. Oh? The military governor has switched to a sword mistress. The players muttered. He can't use the surpassing king's sword, so he can only use the ancient sword mistress. Speaking of which, what was the name of the military governor's ancient sword mistress? I don't have any recollection of it. Do you still want to fight? This sword isn't as durable as the heavenly sword. The Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword saw that Gohan hadn't given up. Instead, he took out an ancient sword mistress. Moreover, this ancient sword mistress looked unfamiliar. She had never seen the Obsidian Heavy Sword before. She guessed that it was a trash ancient sword mistress that was ranked near the bottom. The quality of this sword mistress was not on the same level as the heaven-reliant sword. The heaven-reliant sword had been on the verge of breaking after fighting her for a few minutes, let alone this low-grade ancient sword mistress. She is the Chinpin sword. Don't underestimate her. Otherwise you'll regret it. Gohan smiled. He gently stroked the blade of the Chinpin sword. Then, he lightly flicked the blade with 2 fingers. The Chinpin sword instantly let out a crisp sword cry. Good sword. Hearing this sword cry, the Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword's expression suddenly darkened. As a sword mistress, she was also someone who understood swords. When she heard this sword cry, she knew that the Chinpin sword's material was not ordinary. Please advise me. Gohan, who had always been bowed to by his opponents, suddenly bowed to the Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword. Moreover, it was a 120-degree bow. What is this guy doing? Before the Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword could figure out what was going on, the military governor took the initiative to attack. Who cares? I just need to defeat him. When they clashed again, the Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword suddenly realized that her opponent's swordsmanship was different from before. Previously, her opponent had relied on his in état state to confuse her with a hodgepodge of swordsmanship. Now, however, her opponent's swordsmanship became clear once again. And this clear swordsmanship made the Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword's hair stand on end. 9 solitary swords. When did you learn the 9 solitary swords? The Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword forcefully blasted Gohan away. Then, she stared at Gohan in astonishment. The swordsmanship Gohan had used just now was none other than her 9 solitary swords. Chapter 640. I'm sorry. I realized that my sword technique can't defeat the solitary 9 swords, so I had no choice but to learn it. Gohan replied. You managed to learn the solitary 9 swords in such a short time? The Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword blinked. She then said something that made the audience burst out laughing. Are you kidding me? I wouldn't dare. I only learned 80% of it. It can't be considered a complete mastery. Gohan replied seriously. Without the solitary 9 swords sword technique's general formula, it'll be useless even if you learn it 100%. Take this. The Lady of Recondite's steel-heavy sword spat and once again clashed with Guhan. Originally, the lady had planned to use the real solitary 9 swords to teach this stinking brat a lesson for secretly learning the solitary 9 sword. However, the lady almost vomited blood. This time, Guhan's sword path changed again. The solitary 9 swords was nowhere to be seen. Instead, it was the hodgepodge of sword techniques that caught her off guard. This time, however, there was an additional material in the hodgepodge of sword technique. The military governor had thrown the solitary 9 swords into the mix. He had mixed the solitary 9 swords with his original sword techniques and turned it into an even more chaotic hodgepodge of sword technique. In the face of such a terrifying hodgepodge of sword techniques, the Lady of Recondite's steel-heavy sword suddenly felt powerless. This time, her solitary 9 swords was no longer useful. No matter how she used the broken sword styles techniques, there was nothing she could do against the extremely chaotic hodgepodge of sword technique. What was even more terrifying was that his hodgepodge of sword techniques was still growing. There was something that the lady couldn't explain. It was faintly discernible within the hodgepodge of sword techniques. When the soup and impurities in the hodgepodge of sword techniques were all removed, only God knew what kind of terrifying monster would emerge from it. After exchanging over 100 moves, even Lady Steel Heavy Sword began to feel exhausted. This was the first time the Lady Steel Heavy Sword's heavy attribute had displayed its effects. Lady Steel Heavy Sword could no longer use her arms properly. On the contrary, even though the military governor was drenched in sweat and his body was drenched, his swordsmanship was getting more and more straightforward. What a pity! It would be great if there were a few thousand more moves. Suddenly, Guhan let out a sigh. The chimpin sword in his hand strangely flicked up and struck the Lady of Black Iron Heavy Sword's wrist, causing her to stumble. The Lady of Black Iron Heavy Sword actually slipped out of her hand and fell to the ground. You lost. Guhan pulled back his chimpin sword. Although the obsidian heavy sword Empress's personal shield was still there, once the sword left his hand, he had already lost in a spar between sword wielders. I lost. The dark iron heavy sword Empress nodded and smiled bitterly. You bad guy, you actually used me to practice your sword. You can't bully people like that. Guhan didn't say anything. This kind of thing was not easy to answer. Forget it. Let me ask you, what sword technique did you use just now? Does it have a name? The Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword asked again. It doesn't have a name. Guhan shook his head. It's a sword technique that I combined all that I've learned in my life during a critical moment. It doesn't have a name yet. Haha, since it doesn't have a name, how about I give you one? The Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword chuckled. How about we call it the Great Chowder Sword Technique? The Great Chowder Sword Technique? Cough cough. Although a certain someone had been using this name to describe it, it was really inelegant to use it on a sword technique. Good name. To her surprise, Guhan nodded in agreement. In fact, I also feel that it's like a great chowder. Sigh, even a great chowder was able to defeat my solitary 9 swords. I wonder how terrifying it will be when it's refined and revealed its true form. The Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword sighed. Do your best. When you throw away all the miscellaneous parts of the Great Chowder, it'll be time for this sword technique to reveal its extraordinary power. I look forward to that day. I hope that you'll be able to create it while you're still alive. I'll probably live longer than you. I definitely will. When that time comes, I'll use it to fight you again, Guhan said proudly. This hodgepodge sword technique was a pure sword technique. It was formed by Guhan's fusion of everything he had learned in his life, as well as the solitary 9 swords that he had stolen from the Lady of Recondite's steel heavy sword. Once the essence within was fused and extracted, it would definitely become an extremely terrifying sword technique. TSK, I won't fight you anymore. My solitary 9 swords can't defeat you. However, don't think that the solitary 9 swords is like this. When I tell others that I'm 40% as good as Master Solitary, I'm actually just teasing them. I'm only 10% as good as him at most. When you meet Master Dugu and the solitary 9 swords in his hands, you will understand how desperate the real solitary 9 swords can make you. If it's possible, I'll definitely fight the sword devil, Gohan said calmly. Then, he sheathed the Chinpin sword in his scabbard. Hey, I almost forgot to ask. What's the origin of this ancient sword lady of yours? You've exchanged hundreds of moves with me, but there isn't even a crack on it. Even a spirit sword lady can't do this. It was clear that the Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword was very curious about the Chinpin sword. I also want to know the answer to your question. Gohan's answer was equivalent to not answering her. Hey, stingy! The Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword threw these words at him and walked over to Long Yu, who looked calm. I've lost. Do you want to fight again? No matter how one listened to the Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword's words, they sounded like thorns. No, I'm not his match. At least not now. Long Yu shook his head and answered honestly. Yeah, at least you know your limits. Let me tell you, you'll only be like this for the rest of your life. You can't surpass him. It's best if you don't continue fighting him because you won't even be able to see where he is in the future. That's all. I'm tired. Goodbye. After saying so, the Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword returned to its scabbard. At the same time, Long Yu clenched his fists. Although the host felt that Long Yu wouldn't continue fighting, due to the rules, he still had to confirm it. Mr. Long Yu, do you still want to fight? I admit defeat. After saying these words, Dragon Feather disappeared from the stage. Once a player admitted defeat, they could leave as they pleased. Dragon Feather did not wish to remain on this stage for even a second longer than he had to. Ahem. Our Mr. Long Yu still has urgent matters to attend to. In any case, let us congratulate the military governor for another victory. Everyone, let's cheer. The host shouted loudly, and the entire grandstand immediately burst into a tsunami of cheers. Military governor! Military governor! Military governor! The atmosphere in the arena was close to going crazy. After Gu Jinjendi, this was the second sword wielder to defeat the entire famed sword group. This is great. My money is safe, the player who bought 200,000 said with tears in his eyes. Brother, did you bet that the military governor could defeat the number 1 sword wielder? The player next to him suddenly asked. What's wrong? The player asked cautiously. Nothing. I just want to remind you not to be too proud now. If the military governor could defeat the spirit sword wielder, then your money would be wasted. The player said with a smile. Let me ask you, do you still want the military governor to win? The player was stunned for a moment. Then, he hammered the player's leg. Who cares? If the military governor wins, I'm happy. Money is nothing. Congratulations, Mr. Military Governor. You have defeated Mr. Long Yu. Now you have inherited Mr. Long Yu's right to challenge. You have the right to challenge the higher-level players of the Spirit Sword Group. Do you still want to continue the challenge? The host asked as he raised the microphone to Gohan's mouth. Of course. Gohan replied without hesitation. Then, Mr. Military Governor, you now have a total of 40,000 quarks of Sword Element Oral Solution, and the reward for the first place of the Spirit Sword Group is 80,000 quarks of Sword Element Oral Solution. How much Sword Element Oral Solution do you want to take out as your wager? The host asked again. After defeating the number 1 sword wielder, Gohan had the opportunity to choose his wager number again. If he wanted to fight with the number 1 sword wielder, then Gohan had to take out 20,000 quarks of Sword Element Oral Solution. However, compared with the beginning, this was already an excellent result. Previously, if Gohan wanted to win, he had to take out all of his Sword Element Oral Solution. Now, he only needed to take out half of it. Even if he lost, there would still be 20,000 quarks left, which was an excellent thing. Therefore, Guhan gave such an answer. 38,000. Guhan actually gave such an inexplicable number. This was almost all of Guhan's sword element oral solution. This, Mr. Military Governor, you only need 20,000 quarks. You don't need 38,000. The host kindly reminded him. He thought that Guhan had fought too many fights, so his mind was a little confused, and he miscalculated the number of sword element he needed. I know it's 38,000. I won't change it. Guhan repeated his answer again. Okay. Anyway, this thing belonged to the military governor. If the military governor didn't feel distressed, the host had no reason to feel distressed for the military governor. However, he was very curious in his heart. Why did the military governor have to spend almost all of his sword element oral solution? Obviously, 20,000 quarks was enough. I don't know if Mr. Military Governor can explain the reason behind this. I'm asking this on behalf of the audience. The host knew that the other audience members must be very curious about this question, so he pulled the audience up, for fear that Guhan would not be willing to answer. Because if it's 38,000, I can earn more sword element oral solution. Guhan's answer was very simple. Let's calculate it. If Guhan took out 20,000 quarks of sword element oral solution, then his opponents would be the top 128 plus top 16 plus first place. If he won all 3 battles, then Guhan could get a total of 140,000 quarks of sword element oral solution 2 plus 4 plus 8. If Guhan took out 38,000 quarks of sword element oral solution, then according to the principle of choosing the lower if it's insufficient, then his opponents would be the top 32 plus second place plus first place. He could get a total of 35,000 plus 70,000 plus 80,000 quarks of sword element oral solution. Mr. Military Governor, you're really good at math. The host did not know what to say. Chapter 641. In the spectator's stand, there was one person who had been sitting there silently. No matter how the military governor performed, whether he was in a crisis or one, she always looked very calm. Unfortunately, her constantly rising and falling chest still betrayed her, showing that her heart was not calm. Although he always knew that his master was very awesome, but when he really saw the military governor's battle, Lu Shihua then knew how big the gap between his thoughts and reality was. His master probably couldn't be described as awesome. He was simply a dragon. More importantly, the tall figure of the military governor gave her a faint impulse to follow behind him. Even if she didn't become a sword bearer in the end, it would be great if she could become the disciple of the military governor. All right, Lu Shihua temporarily put his thoughts aside. Right now, it was almost 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and Guhan hadn't even eaten a bite since the beginning. However, the competition wouldn't be suspended just because the military governor didn't eat. The military governor immediately welcomed his next opponent, a spirit sword level sword bearer from the top 32. After drawing the number, this spirit sword level sword bearer decisively accepted the invitation, unlike the other famous sword bearers who had various reasons to refuse. If they found a reason to not dare to fight a sword bearer who only used a sword maiden, then all the spirit sword level sword bearers didn't need to live anymore. Mr. Feng Xiaohanshi, I don't know if you have anything to say about this challenge to our audience? The host once again asked. Of course. Feng Xiaohanshi snatched the host's microphone and placed it on the side. She then looked at Guhan's position. I want to say, Mr. Military Governor, I, Feng Xiaohanshi, deeply admire your ability. If you were a spirit sword level sword bearer, I'm afraid even 10 Feng Xiaohanshi together wouldn't be your opponent. But now, it's better for you to stop. The spirit sword group isn't a place for you right now. In the face of Feng Xiaohanshi's provocation, Guhan didn't answer. He just smiled, and the competition began again. Release Madame Su's sword. At the beginning of the battle, Feng Xiaohanshi directly released her sword Maiden. Her speed was so fast that it didn't even take a second. She probably learned from Ming Yu's previous lesson and knew that without the protection of the Sword Maiden, the sword bearer itself was the biggest weakness. The only way for Gohan was to break the sword bearer's personal shield. Feng Xiaohanshi's thinking was not bad. With Gohan's current strength, directly fighting against a spirit sword maiden was indeed very strenuous, and it was also an unwise move. Moreover, the opponent wasn't an ordinary spirit sword level sword bearer, but one of the top 32 spirit sword level experts. None of these opponents were weak. Their sword element was probably no less than 800,000. Even if this kind of sword maiden just brushed against his body, his personal shield would immediately shatter. This also meant that from now on, Gohan couldn't be hit by the opponent. Even if it was just once, Gohan would definitely lose. This was because the attack power of a spirit sword level sword bearer wasn't something that the current Gohan could withstand. Unless Gohan took out the Yu King's sword, if he was touched even a little, he would die. At the same time, the entire arena was silent. No one dared to make a sound. Everyone was staring at the battlefield, staring at the two people on the battlefield. It had been a whole 60 years. The last time they saw a battle between a treasure sword level and a spirit sword level was 60 years ago. And the audience from 60 years ago had basically all died. In other words, many people would only be able to see this once in their lifetime. If they wanted to see a battle between a treasure sword level and a spirit sword level again, who knew how many 60 years they would have to wait? Feng Xiaohanshi's spirit sword maiden was Madame Su's sword. Hearing this name, everyone might not be familiar with it. They didn't learn this in history class. Was this sword Madame Su's sword? Whose wife was Madame Su? Did she find a beautiful one? In fact, Madame Su wasn't a madam, but a man through and through. Surnamed Su, named Madam, he was a world-famous swordsmith. This sword was forged by him, so it was called Madame Su's sword. Of course, Madame Su's sword should actually be called Madame Su's dagger. However, since Yuchang's sword was called a sword, then Madame Su's dagger was classified as a sword, so there was nothing wrong with naming it Madame Su's sword. As a dagger forged by a human, it was able to surpass the position of a spirit sword, surpassing the fish intestine sword, which was also a dagger, by a whole 2 grades. It must have had an extremely amazing story and fame. Only by gathering thousands of years of fame could an ordinary dagger become a high-level spirit sword maiden. The so-called dagger was naturally used for assassination, and to gather enough fame to become a spirit sword maiden, the target of the assassination must be extremely distinguished. At the very least, it must be the first person in history. Writing up to this point, everyone should have reacted. That's right, this Madame Su's dagger was the dagger that Jing Ku used to assassinate the King of Qin. Jing Ku's assassination of the King of Qin was the first assassination in history, and as a tool, Madame Su's dagger naturally became the #1 dagger in the world. Unless there was a second Qin Shi Huang, no other dagger could surpass the fame of Madame Su's dagger. The freed Madame Su's dagger was a rather beautiful woman. She only had a few pieces of black cloth covering her important parts. The rest of her plump body and skin were exposed. There were all kinds of strange tattoos on her body, making her look like a terrifying female beast. Hide! After Madame Su appeared, her hand lightly touched Feng Xiaohanshi's body. Feng Xiaohanshi and Feng Xiaohanshi disappeared into the air together with Madame Su. This was the passive skill of Madame Su's sword. Madame Su was one of the few killing path sword maidens that could hide together with her sword wielder. If an ordinary sword wielder wanted to hide, they had to hold the hilt of their own sword maiden. However, Madame Su's sword could make her sword wielder invisible at will. This undoubtedly allowed the sword wielder to enter an extremely safe environment. Unless one had the ability to see through invisibility, as long as Feng Xiaohanshi didn't move, Gohan wouldn't be able to find his position. Invisibility? My first opponent is actually Madame Su's sword. I'm starting to regret it. Before Gohan could finish his words, he immediately rolled to the left. At the same time, he used Heavenly Sword to block his ear, and his whole body was sent flying. At the place where Gohan had been sent flying, Mrs. Su's figure flashed past and disappeared again. It seemed that Madame Su had launched a surprise attack on Gohan just now. Unfortunately, Gohan's quick reaction was able to dodge it. The flying military governor didn't have time to stabilize his body and rolled to the side again. Heavenly Sword fiercely struck the ground and blocked Madame Su's sword once again. Madame Su's figure appeared again. This time, she didn't quickly disappear. Instead, she looked at Gohan in surprise before disappearing into the darkness and preparing for the next surprise attack. This process was repeated several times. Every time, Gohan was able to predict Madame Su's attack in advance and perfectly blocked the opponent's attack. However, after blocking a few times, Gohan's wrist was completely swollen. Although the gap in swordsmanship could be made up for with skills, the solid impact from blocking was something that Gohan's body, which was strengthened by a sword, couldn't handle. This was a confrontation with a difference of 2 realms. I must find Feng Xiaohanshi's position. It won't be fun to waste time with Madame Su. Her attacks are too terrifying, Gohan thought to himself. However, Feng Xiaohanshi hid too well and didn't move at all. This made it impossible for Gohan to determine his position based on the subtle movement. There's no other way. This is the only way. Gohan jumped up from the ground and stabbed Heavenly Sword into the ground. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword in the field. In the end, Gohan still used the 9 swords of mysterious heaven. Suddenly, the entire ground cracked and turned into a stone forest. Wow, what kind of move is this? This is the first time I've seen it. When the audience saw the sudden appearance of the stone forest, they could no longer restrain their excitement. The originally quiet environment suddenly became noisy. Ultimate move, this must be the ultimate move that the military governor has been preparing for a long time. Oh my god, a spiritual sword-level sword wielder is really powerful. In an instant, he forced the military governor to use his ultimate move. A player said loudly. The surrounding people nodded, indicating that this was indeed the military governor's ultimate move. How could they know that this was actually one of the 9 sword moves of the military governor? When the ordinary players saw the military governor's ultimate move, they were extremely excited. However, the expert players expressed that they didn't understand. This move looked very powerful and could even change the terrain, but in fact, it didn't have much effect on Madame Su. With Madame Su's movement technique, even if she was on the tip of a needle, she would still be able to stand steadily. Needless to say, this stone forest wouldn't have much effect on Madame Su. Instead, it was the military governor's body that was affected. He felt that this move was completely unnecessary. Of course, the military governor wasn't doing this superfluous move. He only had one goal, and that was to find Feng Xiaohanshi's position. However, as long as Feng Xiaohanshi didn't move, the military governor wouldn't be able to find Feng Xiaohanshi's position based on the changes in the airflow. Therefore, he had to make Feng Xiaohanshi move in order to find Feng Xiaohanshi's position. The moment the stone forest was formed, Gohan noticed a subtle movement in the northwest corner of the stone forest. This was the sound of something falling to the ground. Found you! Gohan's figure instantly disappeared and appeared at the location where the sound came from. The heavenly sword immediately slashed at a stone pillar behind him. When the blade of the sword was still a certain distance away from the stone pillar, it seemed to be blocked by something. Immediately, Feng Xiaohanshi's figure appeared. Gohan's guess was right. Feng Xiaohanshi was hiding here. Found you! Gohan let out a sigh of relief. His body immediately transformed into his hero form, transforming into his divine general form. Then, he injected all the sword elements in his hand into the heavenly sword. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword battling dome. This was Gohan's strongest single-target killer move that was about to slash Feng Xiaohanshi's body. This was the strongest attack that the military governor could use. The Heavenly Sword's hero form had an attack that ignored 10% of defense. In addition to the strongest single-target killer move, Sword Battling Dome, it should be able to break Feng Xiaohanshi's personal shield. After all, the Sword Lady of Massacre's personal shield was famous for being thin. Victory or defeat depended on this move. Chapter 642. You're too cunning. Windy Hanshi looked at the shattered shield on her body, and her face was filled with unspeakable bitterness. Because of the special skill of Madame Su's sword, Windy Hanshi was quite assured of her safety. She felt that it was impossible for the military governor to find her, so she relaxed her vigilance. As a result, she didn't expect that the military governor would suddenly use the terrain skill to force her to expose her whereabouts, and in the end, she was defeated. The whole battle didn't even last for 3 minutes, and she was defeated. Thinking of this, Windy Hanshi's face became even more miserable. This time, she would become the laughingstock of the spirit sword level sword holders, which was really a bit too bad. The winner is Mr. Military Governor. The host announced the final result, and the surrounding stands instantly burst into the most violent cheers. Countless players used their throat-breaking voices to cheer for the military governor's victory. This was the strength of a sword-level sword holder defeating a famous sword-level sword holder. The record of Sword Maiden Online for 200 years was completely broken. Only God knew who would be able to do this next, and when would it be. However, very soon a very dramatic moment appeared. When the large number of audience cheered halfway, their throats seemed to be strangled by something, and suddenly they couldn't make a sound. Immediately, many of the players' eyes were filled with hot tears. Heavens, I've thrown in all my savings, I don't have any left. I'm not convinced that I lost to you, I was too careless. After the battle ended, the stone forest of the arena once again returned to its original state. Feng Xiaohanshi grabbed onto the admiral's clothes and said unwillingly, "It's all over." Gohan didn't say anything. Right now, whatever he said would probably be taken as a provocation by Windy Hanshi, so it was better to just shut up. As the saying goes, silence is golden. You listen to me. Suddenly, Windy Hanshi moved her mouth to the side of Gohan's ear and whispered, "That liquor guard, you understand now." Windy Hanshi hit the military governor's shoulder. "As long as you attack her weak point, I guarantee that she will definitely not be your opponent." "Why are you telling me this?" Gohan's expression was a little strange as he looked at Feng Xiaohanshi. What he had just told him was indeed very useful. If he could use it flexibly, he would definitely be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. However, that method was simply too shameful. Even if he won, it wouldn't feel much different from losing. Don't you understand? As long as the second-place liquor guard loses, everyone will naturally forget about me, the loser of the top 16. Ha! With that, Feng Xiaohanshi left the stage. It seemed like he did not wish to stay on this stage for even a moment longer. Liquor Guard was the second place in the Spirit Sword group, and also the opponent of the military governor in the second round of the Spirit Sword level competition. Because Gohan was only in second place, Gohan didn't need to draw lots. The host directly contacted Liquor Guard. The other party couldn't refuse, nor did she have the face to refuse. This female sword wielder with a frosty face finally appeared in front of the military governor. Liquor Guard had an extremely beautiful long silver hair. Whether it was her facial features or skin, they were all the purest European appearance. From her appearance, one could guess that Liquor Guard should be one of the rare pure-blood Europeans. Liquor Guard had such unique pure-blood European characteristics in the game, so she must also be a pure-blood European in reality. Although the system could change one's appearance, it was only a Photoshop modification on the original foundation. Therefore, the most basic appearance characteristics of pure-blood Europeans wouldn't change. At the same time, because the majority of the sword-bearers after the apocalypse were of Chinese descent, and the base city of China was also the first to be established, about 70% of the survivors were Chinese. Therefore, the theory of Chinese superiority had never disappeared in the past 1,000 years. It had become a tacit statement that everyone agreed on. Therefore, most Europeans hoped that they could be of mixed blood with Chinese. This way, more sword-bearers could be born. Therefore, in reality, pure-blood Europeans were extremely rare. Only a few European families that intermarried with each other maintained a certain level of pure blood. Apart from them, it was very difficult to find such a person. However, Lycurgard's attire was a little strange. She was actually wearing a full set of half-body armor, like a majestic female knight of Ling. What left a deep impression on Gohan was the pair of terrifying murder weapons on Lycurgard's chest. Gohan swore to the heavens that these were definitely the biggest murder weapons he had ever seen. Gohan had never seen such terrifying murder weapons. ABCDFGHIJK. God, it felt like Mount Tai was nothing more than this. Hello! Gohan took the initiative to greet Lycurgard. This was standard etiquette. Don't show me any goodwill. I won't hold back. Perhaps there was a hole in Lycurgard's brain. When she saw Gohan's polite nod, she took it as a sign of goodwill. Then, she pointed the sword in her hand at Gohan's nose. You listen to me. I will not allow the glory of a spirit sword knight to fall in the hands of a mere sword knight like you. After that, Lycurgard smashed her knight's sword on the ground and let out a loud bang. The pair of astonishing opes on her upper body shook like two bouncing balls. While almost all the audience's attention was attracted by the murder weapons on Lycurgard's chest, Gohan's attention was focused on the sword in Lycurgard's hand. This was a very strange sword. Because one part of it was a wide knight's sword, but the other end of the hilt was not as simple as it seemed. Instead, there was a steel flagpole extending from the hilt. Since it was a flagpole, naturally, there was a flag hanging on the other end. On the flag, there was a picture of two angels holding lilies. This sword could no longer be called a sword. It was more appropriate to call it a sword flag. This was because it was a combination of a sword and a flag. On one side was a sword, and on the other side was a high-spirited flag. At first glance, Gohan knew the name of this sword. There was only one sword in the world that was so unique and had a flag as one. That was the Sacred Sword of Jean. The Sacred Sword of Jean was the sword of Saint Joan of Arc. As for the story of Saint Joan of Arc, it was unknown to humans after the apocalypse. The sword mistress herself was never willing to mention the story of Saint Joan of Arc to anyone. Therefore, it became an eternal secret that lingered in the hearts of the world. Hey! Shameless villain, where are you looking at? You lecher! This pure-blooded European spoke Chinese fluently. This female knight probably saw the admiral staring at her without moving his eyes, so she naturally thought that her weapon had attracted his attention. She could not help but scold him. At the same time, she thought to herself, I thought this military governor was powerful. It turns out that he is also a shameless lecher. I must teach him a lesson later. Begin. The arena once again entered a combat-ready state. First, Lycurgard inserted her sacred sword of Jean deep into the ground. Immediately after, a dazzling light shone. The flag that was originally attached to the hilt was inserted into the ground, while the body of the sword was held in Lycurgard's hand. This Lycurgard did not summon the sacred sword of Jean. Instead, she held the sword by herself. Could it be that Lycurgard was also a sword mistress? Of course, Lycurgard was not a sword mistress. A sword mistress was not that worthless. The reason why Lycurgard fought with a sword like a sword mistress was because of the unique characteristic of the sacred sword of Jean. For some reason, the sacred sword of Jean would never reveal its true form in front of the world unless it was forced to do so by its wielder. She would rather exist in the form of a sword in this world. The sacred sword of Jean had a special ability, which was to project its own swordsmanship onto its wielder. Regardless of whether the wielder had a foundation in swordsmanship or not, as long as the wielder held the sacred sword of Jin, they could naturally master the swordsmanship of the sacred sword of Jin and fight like a sword mistress. Therefore, this characteristic of the sacred sword of Jin was unique. It could forcibly create a sword mistress. Obviously, this was the case for Lycurgard. Die, you big pervert! After Lycurgard held the sacred sword of Jin, her entire body became a little frenzied. She raised the sacred sword of Jin and slashed at Gohan. With a clang sound, Gohan blocked the sacred sword of Jin. However, the muscles on Gohan's arm involuntarily trembled the moment he blocked the attack. Lycurgard's strength was extremely terrifying. It was as if a few tons of iron hammer had smashed down. The moment he blocked the attack, Gohan felt as if his bones had cracked, giving off a heart-piercing pain. I heard that you relied on finding the hiding place of that trash, Feng Shao Hanshi, to defeat him. The moment the two of them blocked each other, Lycurgard said to Gohan, "You might be able to deal with this kind of fragile chicken, but you can't deal with me. I am the sword mistress, and the sword mistress is me. It is impossible for you to defeat me." Lycurgard was right. She was much more difficult to deal with than Feng Shao Hanshi. Gohan's fighting style of shaking off the sword mistress and bullying the wielder did not work on Lycurgard at all. This was because she was also a sword mistress. Moreover, her sword mistress was a royal way sword mistress, a royal way sword mistress with 3 basic attributes that were relatively average. After saying this, Lycurgard wanted to kick Gohan in the stomach, wanting to send him flying. However, she did not expect that Lycurgard's sword would miss. The military governor leaped into the air and jumped away. Chapter 643. Unable to land a kick on Gohan's body, Lycurgard was left in a rather sorry state. Feeling humiliated, Lycurgard's heart was filled with hatred. She continued to chase after the military governor. Having learned his lesson from the previous battle, Gohan didn't want to fight Lycurgard head-on. The woman's strength was too terrifying. His bones were aching, and facing her head-on wouldn't end well. As a result, Gohan decisively changed his fighting style. He began to play guerrilla warfare. This is a creative tactic created by the founding ancestor of the last dynasty before the Great Destruction. I don't need to explain it to you guys. It's to constantly harass Lycurgard, while Gohan himself will never face Lycurgard head-on. For a moment, Lycurgard suddenly found herself in an extremely awkward situation. The military governor's movements were extremely slippery. Even though Lycurgard was 2 tiers higher than him, her sword couldn't even touch Gohan's body. Gohan evaded every single one of her attacks. Meanwhile, Gohan took the opportunity to leave a mark on Lycurgard's body from time to time, dealing some damage. It was as if dripping water could pierce through a rock. "Damn it, this isn't the honor of a knight. Come out and fight me for 300 rounds. Lycurgard said angrily. Her giant Opie kept swaying along with her roar, mesmerizing the spectators. They wanted nothing more than to rush to Lycurgard's side and bury their heads in between the 2 giant Opie. "Your Majesty, slow down." Helplessly, Lycurgard returned to the flag she had planted. She grabbed the flagpole and yelled. Suddenly, the white flag turned blue. At the same time, Gohan suddenly felt his feet sink. His movement speed was suddenly reduced by more than 5 times. This was the ultimate skill of the sacred sword of Jin, Glorious Flag Whisper. By changing the color of the flag, the battle flag can release different tactical effects. Red, Sovereign, Full Assault. All sword bearers within range have their attack power increased by 500% for 20 seconds. Blue, Sovereign, Slow Deceleration. All enemies within range have their movement speed reduced by 500% for 20 seconds. Green, Sovereign, Fearless Protection. All sword wielders within range enter an invincible state, become immune to all attacks, and recover 1000 shield energy per second for 10 seconds. Cooldown 10 minutes. In order to attack the military governor, Liquorguard went all out. She actually used Jean d'Arc's ultimate skill, Glorious Semaphore. This was an ultimate skill with a 10-minute cooldown. Liquorguard would not normally use it unless it was absolutely necessary. However, she had no choice but to use it. The military governor's movements were too cunning. If Liquord didn't use the Glorious Semaphore, she wouldn't even be able to touch the military governor's body. Liquorguard's thinking was simple. As long as the military governor's movement speed was reduced, he would not be able to dodge her attack. Moreover, the reduced movement speed would last for 20 seconds. This was enough time for her to slash the military governor 30 to 40 times. In fact, she didn't even need 30 to 40 strikes. At most, she would only need 3 strikes. Liquorguard was confident that she could destroy the military governor's shield. Go to hell, pervert! Liquorguard shouted as she charged at the motionless military governor. Gohan smiled bitterly. Liquorguard's move was too ruthless. If he was a spirit sword tier sword bearer, even if his sword essence was 5 times stronger, he was confident that he could make a fool out of Liquorguard. However, he was only holding onto a sword now. It was impossible for him to dodge Liquorguard's attack within 20 seconds. There seemed to be no other way for him to block. Sigh, looks like I'll have to reveal the 9 swords of mysterious heaven again. Gohan shook his head. He had already used the 9 swords of mysterious heaven twice before. If he used it again, it would definitely attract the attention of others. He didn't know if it would result in a bad outcome. However, there was no other way. If he didn't use it, Gohan would really be defeated by Liquorguard. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, engraved sword. Gohan had used this move in the Wudong Peak dungeon before. Generally speaking, only spirit sword tier sword bearers could fly in the air. However, Gohan could indirectly achieve this through engraved sword. The reason for that was because Sword Practitioner's Engrave was actually a sword controlling technique. Gohan could control the heaven-reliant sword to fly freely in the sky, while Gohan only needed to hold onto his own heaven-reliant sword to fly together with his sword mistress. So when Liquorguard charged at him aggressively and satisfyingly, Gohan flew. He actually flew into the sky. F***ck. The military governor flew into the sky. He really flew into the sky. Liquorguard and all the other players stared at this scene with their mouths agape. They had thought of many ways that the military governor could deal with this desperate situation, but they never thought that the military governor would actually fly into the sky. Big brother, is my memory spoiled? Why do I remember that only spirit sword tier sword bearers can fly? Can sword bearers below spirit sword tier also fly? A player's mouth opened and closed like a dead fish. Don't ask me, my memory is spoiled too. This player's expression was also similar to that of a dead fish. Sigh, even if the military governor can fly, so can Liquorguard. The military governor still can't escape defeat. Another player said with a sigh. You don't know this, but the military governor really escaped this time. Liquorguard's ultimate move was wasted. The first player replied. Why? I've seen the flying speed of spirit sword tier sword bearers. This military governor is flying so slowly, he will definitely be caught by Liquorguard. This player asked in confusion. Someone who shouldn't be able to fly flew, so someone who can fly naturally can't fly. The military governor's flying speed was indeed very fast. He leisurely grabbed the heavenly sword in his hand and slowly floated into the sky, about the same speed as a hydrogen balloon. The flying speed of a normal spirit sword tier sword bearer was about the same as the flying speed of a wild goose. Catching a hydrogen balloon was really a very simple thing. However, the helpless thing was that Liquorguard could only stand on the ground and watch the military governor fly into the sky, because Liquorguard couldn't fly. As the saying goes, gain at the mulberry gourd, lose at the east corner. Where there is gain, there is loss. P.S. Well, in fact, it should be lost at the east corner, gain at the mulberry gourd. Everyone, don't get it wrong. In the book review section, people are saying that I'm teaching children bad things. Because of the characteristics of the sacred sword of Jean, Lycurgard obtained the ability of a sword master, but it also made her lose the ability to fly. No one knew why, but the sacred sword of Jean was one of the few spirit sword maidens who didn't have the ability to fly. Lycurgard could only watch the military governor fly in the sky and then forcibly drag on for 20 seconds before falling down from the sky. At this moment, Lycurgard's mood was exploding. She felt as if she was being ridiculed by the military governor. In fact, engraved swordsman was a skill that consumed a lot of sword essence. It consumed up to 500 quarks of sword essence per second, which was a whole 10,000 quarks of sword essence in 20 seconds, which was equivalent to 2/5 of the sword essence in Gohan's body. Therefore, Gohan couldn't stay in the air forever. When the buff ended, he immediately descended from the sky. More importantly, the sword essence in Gohan's body could only support the consumption of engraved swordsman for another 20 seconds at most. The cooldown time of Lycurgard's ultimate skill was 10 minutes. In other words, within 10 minutes, Gohan had to kill Lycurgard. Otherwise, he would be in big trouble. However, Lycurgard was indeed an extremely difficult swordsman to deal with. Originally, Gohan planned to rely on a sneak attack on the swordsman instead of fighting the sword maidens head-on, but it was completely ineffective against Lycurgard. Although Lycurgard's swordsmanship wasn't brilliant, it wasn't weak either. By relying on her overwhelming sword essence and strength, she could completely drag out the 10-minute. Gohan had no other way to deal with her. Everything is for Europe. To make matters worse, Lycurgard's anger had completely erupted. She suddenly let out a loud roar and a hazy golden light appeared on her body. A pair of golden wings appeared on her back, making her look like an angel. This was the advanced skill of the sacred sword of Jean, Saintess Descent, transfers the power of the Saintess to Jean's body, greatly increasing Jean's agility. At the same time, she also gained the effect of Holy Flame. Attacks can burn the enemy's flesh and blood, dealing 1,000 points of damage per second for 10 seconds. The damage can be stacked up to 5 times. Saintess Descent consumes 2,000 quarks of sword essence per second. With the increase in agility, Lycurgard once again chased after Gohan and began to attack. This time, her speed was significantly increased. Gohan felt that it was difficult for him to dodge Lycurgard's attacks. If he tried to block, his bones wouldn't be able to withstand Lycurgard's strength. There were even a few times when Lycurgard's attacks almost grazed Gohan's body. If he was grazed by Lycurgard, it would be over for him. This was because the Holy Flame would immediately attach to Gohan's body. Right now, Gohan only had a total of 10,000 points of sword essence on his body. If the Holy Flame burned for 10 seconds, Gohan's body would be burned to a sliver of HP. There's no other way. Looks like I'll have to use the method that Windrider Hanshi mentioned. Although Gohan felt that this method was shameless, if he was really forced into a corner, he would not hesitate to use this method. In the next moment, the military governor once again dodged Lycurgard's attack in a somewhat awkward manner. He then casually swung the Heaven-Reliant sword at Lycurgard's body. As the most prominent part of Lycurgard's body was a certain large part, the Heaven-Reliant sword naturally landed on Lycurgard's monstrous weapon. There was nothing strange about it. However, the moment the Heaven-Reliant sword came into contact with Lycurgard's body, the originally aggressive Jean's sword of Jean's hand suddenly froze. She immediately raised her hand to protect her chest, not even bothering to attack Gohan. Chapter 644. Shameless. Pervert. Pervert. Lycurgard hugged her Opie and glared at Gohan in embarrassment and anger. Her face was still flushed. How could you attack me here? Lycurgard's words stunned the male audience for a moment. Then, they all revealed a strange smile. This military governor was too much. How could he attack a girl's opie? Sigh, unfortunately, I didn't pay attention just now. It would be great if there was a replay. How would the military governor answer such an awkward question? The audience was looking forward to the military governor's answer. You're too arrogant. Gohan's answer was short and straightforward. The male audience nodded in agreement. It was indeed reasonable and convincing. But then again, the military governor's attack just now seemed to be unintentional. Did Lycurgard need to react so strongly? During a battle, swords and blades were silent. All that mattered was victory. It was normal for a situation like this to happen. It was common for other female sword-wielders to encounter similar situations. Meanwhile, the female audience members secretly spat and called her a bitch. However, they were not calling her a bitch for Gohan, but for Lycurgard, who asked her to have a pair of opie that all women were envious of. She even shamelessly used them to seduce men. She was indeed a bitch. Those with big breasts were all bitches. Go to hell. Lycurgard was furious. She picked up Jean d'Arc's sword and began to attack the military governor like a storm. In her rage, Lycurgard's attack speed increased by a lot, surpassing her previous attack speed. This caused Gohan to be in an even more difficult situation. Therefore, intentionally or unintentionally, the heavenly sword collided with Jean d'Arc's lethal weapon. Ah! Lycurgard couldn't help but give up on her attack and protect her opie. You're doing it again? Lycurgard hugged her opie and was on the verge of tears. You're a pervert. Whatever you think. Gohan shrugged his shoulders, expressing his innocence. In the following battle, although Lycurgard was still furious, she became very cautious. While attacking, she used her left hand to shield her opie, ready to defend against any attack from the military governor. Unfortunately, Lycurgard's defense did not have any effect. On the contrary, because of her uncoordinated movements, her already flawed swordsmanship became even more flawed. This gave the military governor the opportunity to stab Opie with his sword. Wow! This stab was different from the previous two. This time, Gohan obviously used a lot of strength. Lycurgard's reaction was even more peculiar. This time, she did not protect her opie. Instead, she squatted on the ground and 2 drops of tears flowed out of her eyes. She looked at Gohan resentfully. At this moment, even an idiot could tell that the military governor did not attack Lycurgard's opie by accident. He did it on purpose. Otherwise, how could he attack her opie when Lycurgard was guarding it to the death? Do you still dare to argue this time? You clearly did it on purpose. Lycurgard's face turned even redder. Her huge breasts could be seen trembling through the armor. Yes, I did it on purpose this time, Gohan admitted readily. Because I noticed that you cared about those 2 pieces of fat the last 2 times, so I tried to attack them. It was very effective. Military Governor, you're awesome. Hearing Gohan's words, the male audience gave him a thumbs up. Perhaps they could secretly tease the alluring opie like the military governor. However, it was hard to find someone in this world who could admit that he did it on purpose in front of tens of millions of people. Moreover, he even explained the reason behind it with a straight face. Apart from the military governor, no one else in this world could do it. As for the female audience, they also felt very comfortable. The word fat was a great way to describe it. How appropriate! They were indeed 2 pieces of damned fat. Fat that was too oily even when frying oil. You! Lycurgard didn't know how to insult Gohan anymore. This girl, who had been determined to be a knight since she was young, was very fluent in Chinese. However, she didn't have a deep understanding of the traditional Chinese vocabulary. Other than pervert and pervert, she actually couldn't think of any other words. Lycurgard bravely stood up again and continued to attack Gohan. However, this time, her attack was completely different. Only her right hand was attacking, while her left hand was directly hugging her opie. In this way, Lycurgard didn't have any swordsmanship to speak of. Even if Gohan slowed down his speed by 2 times, she still wouldn't be able to touch Gohan's body. As a result, the one who was crazily attacking became Solid Han. In a second, as many as 7 to 8 swords landed on Lickerguard's body. Under the attack of Solid Han, this female contestant, who was ranked number 2 in the Spirit Sword tier, actually had the energy of her protective shield drop at a speed visible to the naked eye. And other than hugging onto her OP, she had no other way to deal with it. Very soon, Lickerguard's shield fell to less than 20%. Defeat was right in front of her eyes. Thinking that she was going to be humiliated by the military governor and also be defeated by the military governor, Lickerguard's heart was filled with despair. She decided to fight back with all her might and teach Gohan a harsh lesson. Lickerguard wasn't a brainless woman. She realized that because her performance was too useless, the military governor had already let down his guard against her. All his attention had shifted to attacking. This was a huge opportunity for her, a chance to turn defeat into victory. Now, when the shield was about to fall below the 10% threshold, Lickerguard swung the sacred sword of Jin in her hand. Using all her strength and technique, Lickerguard swung the sword in her hand at the military governor's neck. Lickerguard also activated her advanced skills and basic skills, instantly doubling her agility. I'll definitely hit. With this realization, Lickerguard used the most stunning sword move in her life. She imagined the scene of the military governor being cut in half by her sword, kneeling and begging for mercy. How strange. She had already cut him in half, so how could he still kneel and beg for mercy? Well, this wasn't a problem. Anyway, in Lickerguard's eyes, Gohan wouldn't be able to escape this sword. But in reality, how could an expert like the military governor not guard against the opponent's counterattack? Even a fool could guess that the opponent wouldn't be willing to accept defeat and would fight to the death. So, Gohan immediately leaped to the left. As long as he dodged this sword, Lickerguard would lose her momentum and lose for sure. But unexpectedly, Lickerguard suddenly lost her center of gravity and fell onto the military governor's sword. Lickerguard's full strength and the acceleration of gravity caused her OP to crash into Gohan's sword. Even though it was the soft OP that was directly hit, Gohan felt as if a small portion of his bones had been broken. The pain caused Gohan's eyes to twitch uncontrollably. If Gohan was in such a state, then Lickerguard was in a similar state. After suffering such a violent impact, her OP let out an extremely coquettish moan and fell heavily to the ground. Because it was falling with her chest down, after the OP hit the ground, Lickerguard's body bounced up like a bouncing ball. The voluptuous OP had amazing elasticity, causing Lickerguard's body to flip over and land on her back instead of her face. This elasticity. How good would it be if I could touch it? Seeing this scene, all the male audience members simultaneously swallowed their saliva in unison. They couldn't help but grasp the air as if they could feel the elasticity. After that, Lickerguard's video was intercepted and made into a GIF. It was circulated among countless players and was voted as one of the most alluring GIFs in history. Her name was passed down through the ages. Lickerguard, who was lying on the ground, didn't seem to have fainted. Instead, she let out soft moans. Gohan also noticed that there was a pool of water slowly flowing down from the beautiful female knight's lower body. Let me tell you, Lickerguard's weakness is her OP. Legend has it that if you touch her OP lightly, she won't be able to stand it. I'm risking my life to tell you this. You can't tell anyone that I told you this. Gohan recalled what Windy Hanshi had told him. Initially, he was still skeptical about it. However, now Gohan was sure that Windy Hanshi wasn't exaggerating. Instead, she had shrunk down a lot. The sensitivity of Lickerguard's OP had reached a terrifying level. Gohan stepped between Lickerguard's legs to prevent the audience from seeing this scene. He then poked Lickerguard's face with his heaven-reliant sword. "Miss Lickerguard, do you still want to fight?" "You." Lycurgard opened her eyes and glared at Gohan fiercely. Just as she was about to say that she still wanted to fight, she immediately discovered that her lower body was cold. She also discovered that Gohan's foot was stepping on the pool of water. Her expression instantly became extremely strange. Play by yourself. This old lady isn't going to play with you anymore. This old lady admits defeat. After Lycurgard finished speaking, she could no longer suppress her tears. She bawled and instantly disappeared from the arena. Very good, Gohan won again, although his method was a little despicable. Mr. Military Governor, congratulations on winning this match. The host walked to Gohan's side with a smile that all men would understand. He bumped his shoulder. Then, let us welcome your last opponent in the Spiritual Sword Group, the champion of the Spiritual Sword Group. Before the host could finish his words, there seemed to be some news coming from the communication device. Immediately, his expression stiffened, and he only recovered after a long time. Dear audience, let me tell you a piece of unfortunate news. Just now I've received the latest news. The champion of the Spiritual Sword Group died last night because of Yuan Ko's attack. F***CK. What the hell is this? The audience looked at each other in dismay. Military Governor's opponent was gone just like that? Didn't that mean that Military Governor had directly obtained victory and was going to fight against an immortal sword-tier sword wielder? Chapter 645. While the audience was shocked by the fact that Gohan could go straight to the sword fairy level swordsman battle, in the official conference room, the 4 special planners had once again started a group meeting. 2 meetings for a player in one day was something that had never happened before. Can we confirm that the number 1 spiritual sword level swordsman is dead? One of the special planners touched his head and asked with a bitter smile. It has been confirmed. This was personally confirmed by Her Excellency Tomono Kakashi. He died in a surprise attack by Yuan Ko at 2 o'clock this morning. One of the special planners replied. How did he die? How did he die at this juncture? This planner's smile became even more bitter. He was an outsider from Moscow, an ordinary person. Although the invasion of Moscow has subsided, there are still many Yuan Ko outside. The chairman of the Sword Council of Moscow took the risk to send people to restore the fields outside the city. In the end, the camp outside the city was attacked at night. When he was half awake, he probably thought that he was still a spiritual sword-level swordsman and wanted to go out to fight Yuan Ko. In the end, he was bitten to death by a tiger-level Yuan Ko. One of the special planners said with a bitter expression. This kind of thing had happened many times since the appearance of Sword Maiden online. Many ordinary people were experts in the game, but in reality they forgot this point. Hence, all kinds of tragedies occurred. Alright, how this person died is not important. What's important is the opponent of the military governor. A special planner knocked on the table. How should we arrange this military governor now? Should we let the 3rd place fight him, or let him go straight to the sword fairy level battle? 3rd place? He even defeated the 2nd place, why would he fight the 3rd place? Another planner sneered. This is not in line with the rules at all. But the method he used to defeat the 2nd place was obviously a trick. The planner knocked on the table. He took advantage of the 2nd place's fatal weakness to win. He didn't use his true strength to defeat his opponent. I don't think he's a match for the 3rd place at all. The 3rd place can end his winning streak. Isn't winning by exploiting the opponent's weakness a victory? No matter what, a victory is a victory. We don't have the right to change the rules of the competition. There are only 2 choices now. Either we find a suitable opponent for military governor and let him go straight to the Legend of the Sword and Fairy group. According to what you said, we only have one choice. If the 3rd place can't be a match for the military governor, where else can I find a match for the military governor? Then let the military governor ascend to the Legend of the Sword and Fairy team. Seeing that the two special planners were about to get into an argument, the other two hurriedly pulled them back and sighed in their hearts. This military governor was really a scourge. Not only did he cause them to have 2 meetings a day, but he also caused the 2 gentle special planners to fight. Actually, I have an idea. Suddenly, a cute Loli's voice sounded in the conference room. The 4 special planners all stood up and saluted Tomono Kakashi, who suddenly appeared in front of them. After saluting, one of the special planners asked curiously, "What idea do you have, Mr. Tomono?" "It's not a good idea. Have you forgotten? In the legend of the Sword and Fairy group, there is a sword bearer who is not a sword and fairy level sword bearer. Isn't it perfect to let him fight?" Tomono Kakashi's words made everyone's eyes light up. That's right. How could they forget this person? Ladies and gentlemen, our officials have the latest evaluation results. After a decision, the officials have decided to continue the competition for the first place in the spiritual sword level. After a long period of silence, the host suddenly announced the result to all the gamers. Continue the competition? Who is the opponent? Where can we find another opponent for the military governor who surpasses the second place in the spiritual sword level? The audience looked at each other in dismay. They couldn't figure out how to continue the competition. After careful consideration by the officials, they have decided to let Sky Quake of the Sword and Fairy Group be the opponent of Mr. Military Governor. The host continued to announce. The audience immediately began to discuss it. Sky Quake, it's him. If it's him, then it's indeed reasonable. The players said one after another. Although Tianjin had been included in the Legend of the Sword and Fairy group, the debate about him had never stopped. This was because Tianjin could only be considered half a Legend of the Sword and Fairy level swordsman. He had only joined the Legend of the Sword and Fairy group because he had unsuccessfully appealed to the officials. This student Skyquake could be considered a famous player in the world. He only had 600,000 sword elements, which was far from the minimum requirement of 1 million quarks of sword elements for a sword and fairy level sword bearer. However, he still had his own sword and fairy level sword bearer, the ancestral dragon sword. It was said that the ancestral dragon sword was made from the dragon sword of the ancestral dragon. It had the powerful power of the desolate level Yuan Ko ancestral dragon. It was a sword and fairy level sword that could only be synchronized by humans with dragon bloodline. It sounded similar to Lu Shihua's Angel series sword bearer. However, the ancestral dragon sword was not a set like the Angel series sword bearer. There was only one ancestral dragon sword. However, the ancestral dragon sword had another characteristic, which was that it could be used at a lower level. As long as the synchronizer's dragon bloodline was rich enough, it could reduce the sword elements needed for synchronization. It was said that in reality, there was once a sword bearer of the ancestral dragon sword. When he was synchronized, he was only a sword bearer of the famous sword level. Naturally, the ancestral dragon bloodline in his body was very rich. The fact that this student Skyquake could synchronize the ancestral dragon sword at the spiritual sword level was not a small piece of news. It had been talked about by the players for a long time. What made this student Skyquake even more famous was that after he succeeded in synchronizing the ancestral dragon sword, he tried to apply to participate in the Battle of the Spiritual Sword group as a sword bearer of the spiritual sword level. The reason was very good. It was because his sword elements were not up to the standard of a sword bearer of the fairy level. If this guy was allowed to participate in the Battle of the Spiritual Sword group with the sword bearer of the fairy level, there was almost no suspense in the first place of the spiritual sword group. Therefore, after the officials considered it again and again, they decisively rejected his request and threw him into the fairy level. In the end, this player filed a complaint 5 to 6 times. He even posted a post on the forum, condemning the game officials for neglecting the rules and violating the rules. Unexpectedly, when the matter was completely exposed, all the players who knew about this matter scolded Skyquake and praised the game officials for being fair and objective. As a result, Skyquake had no choice but to participate in the battle of the fairy level. Then, he was defeated in the first round and was almost in the last place. Now, letting Skyquake become the opponent of the military governor would perfectly solve all the problems. First of all, Skyquake's strength was undoubtedly stronger than the second place in the spiritual sword group. Moreover, because of his own particularity, it was reasonable for him to be in the spiritual sword group. In addition, almost all the special planners hated this shameless Skyquake to the extreme. Therefore, they simply threw Skyquake in front of the military governor and let him be the opponent of the military governor in the last battle of the spiritual sword group. However, Gohan didn't know about Skyquake, so the host explained the reason for choosing Skyquake as the opponent of the military governor. After listening, Gohan frowned, thought for a while, and asked the host, "Since he is using the sword bearer of the fairy level, may I ask if I can use the Yu-King sword? Use the Yu-King Go-Jian sword?" The host was stunned by the question. According to Gohan's previous oath, he should not use the sword bearer of the famous sword bearer in the spiritual sword group. But now Gohan's opponent inexplicably became a sword bearer with the sword bearer of the immortal sword bearer, but the group still remained in the spiritual sword group. This was indeed a difficult question to answer. Helplessly, the host could only report this question to the official. This time, the official reply was very fast. It was just 2 words: agreed. Since the military governor's side was settled, the host immediately contacted Skyquake's communication device. As soon as the other party heard about this matter, he immediately agreed. After a while, a man with strange bones appeared on the arena. It was indeed not wrong to say that he had strange bones, because this person was extremely thin, so thin that his whole body looked like a water chestnut. It was really the best description of a bag of bones. "Mr. Military Governor, I, Skyquake, pay my respects to you." Although this Skyquake was a little thinner, he looked very polite. As soon as they met, he saluted Gohan. However, the haze between his eyebrows never dissipated, which made Gohan very uncomfortable. Gohan snorted in response to Skyquake's salute. Skyquake smiled slightly and was not angry. 1 minute later, the match officially began. "Ha ha ha. My good grandson, didn't you say that the battle would continue for a while? Why is it starting now?" A sword lady with red hair and scales on her body came out from the ancestral dragon sword. As soon as she appeared on the stage, she announced her existence with a harsh laughter. The madness of the ancestral dragon was unparalleled in the world. It was not surprising that the ancestral dragon sword had such a character. Reporting to Grandma Ancestral Dragon, there is a sword bearer of the famous sword level who dares to challenge you. I can't refuse, so I can only let Grandma Ancestral Dragon accept the challenge. Skyquake actually called his own sword lady Grandma. This was the first time. However, after thinking about it carefully, if Skyquake really had the bloodline of the ancestral dragon, it was not a big deal to call the ancestral dragon Grandma. What do you think I, the ancestral dragon, am? How dare you let a piece of trash challenge me? Ow 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 ow. I'm so angry. The ancestral dragon let out an angry roar. Speaking of which, this ancestral dragon did not seem to have a high IQ. He was so easily agitated. Gohan was not surprised by this, because the ancestral dragon sword was made from the dragon horn of the ancestral dragon. Although the dragon horn was a sharp weapon used to attack, and was the best material for making a sword, it was normal for a solid object like this to be brainless. Once it was angry, it would shout and kill. Chapter 646. In the face of the ancestral Dragon's furious roar, the hearts of the audience stirred, and they all lamented for Gohan. Ancestral Dragon's sword might not have a brain, but it was shockingly powerful. More importantly, It was a true celestial sword maiden. Guhan had no chance of winning against a celestial sword wielder. Just the celestial sword wielder's ability to control the void was not something that the military governor could handle. As long as the opponent opened the void door, she could send the military governor into the void. Without even fighting, the military governor would lose. Hence, in the eyes of the majority of the audience, the admiral's defeat was already set in stone. No matter how he carried on, he would only struggle for a while. It was impossible for the admiral to defeat the ancestral dragon sword, a sword lady of the immortal sword rank. Otherwise, the majority of the audience's worldview would be completely refreshed. "You king!" Guhan drew out the King of Yu's Gojin sword, which he had been waiting for a long time, from its sheath. This sword, which had appeared for a brief moment, once again appeared in front of the audience. "Despicable brat! You actually plan to use a sword maiden made of ordinary iron to fight me?" When Ancestral Gragon saw Yu King Go Jian, she couldn't help but get even angrier. In her eyes, other than sword ladies who were also immortal sword ladies, all sword ladies who dared to appear before her were lowly things. Ancestral Dragon Horn Strike. Ancestral Dragon Sword used its basic technique in anger. It planned to defeat this sword maiden that dared to provoke it immediately and make her pay for her lowly actions. Ancestral Dragon Horn Strike was the basic technique of the Ancestral Dragon Sword. The attack contained Ancestral Dragon's domineering aura. It could deal 200% to 1000% damage to all sword maidens that were lower in rank than the user. This move was simply a sure kill technique for low-grade immortal sword ladies or low-grade universal sword silhouettes. It would deal at least 200% damage to opponents who were of a lower rank than the user. If a spirit sword lady were to be hit by this attack, she would probably lose 1/5 of her shield. If a famed sword lady were to be hit by this attack, it would probably be game over. Therefore, Ancestral Gragon was very confident that under his attack, this ordinary iron thing would definitely be destroyed by him. The only way for Guhan to win was to escape. Using speed to escape Ancestral Dragon's attack was the only way out. However, Ancestral Dragon's opponent was the military governor. This person's strength could not be calculated by common sense. Facing such an attack, Guhan actually raised the Yu King Gojin sword and planned to use it to block the Ancestral Dragon sword. "Humph, you're seeking death." Ancestral Dragon snorted in disdain. She didn't attack the inspector's body. Instead, she slashed her Ancestral Dragon sword at the cold Yu King Gojin sword. She planned to cut the sword in half. Clang! The two swords collided with each other. Guhan's sword flew dozens of meters away at the moment of impact and fell to the ground. This showed how terrifying the Ancestral Dragon sword was. The Ancestral Dragon sword suddenly realized that although the admiral had been sent flying by it and looked rather pathetic, he had been constantly adjusting his landing posture while he was flying so that he could land in the best way. The real damage he suffered was not high. More importantly, the Yu King Gojin sword was not broken by it. Instead, it emitted a dark light. "This ordinary iron isn't damaged." Ancestral Dragon revealed a suspicious expression. "Could it be that this sword isn't made of ordinary iron?" "Of course this sword isn't made of ordinary iron." Guhan stood up from the ground and patted the dust off his body. "Even a 3-year-old knows that the Yu King Gojin sword is made of bronze. This isn't an iron sword, it's a bronze sword." "You!" Ancestral Gragon's face turned ashen. She seemed to feel that the audience around her was laughing at her. Ancestral Dragon Horn Strike. Flustered and exasperated, she continued to use basic skills to attack the military governor. However, this seemed to be a repeat of the previous attack. Although the military governor was sent flying by the Ancestral Dragon, the military governor didn't actually suffer much damage. Yu King Gojin's sword didn't seem to be damaged at all. Yu King Gojin's sword is really a famous sword rank sword maiden? Seeing this scene, the audience was speechless. The ancestral dragon sword was not only a sword lady of the immortal sword rank, it was also a famous tyrannical sword lady among the sword ladies of the immortal sword rank. It took pleasure in slicing the opponent into two. Even if it was a sword lady of the spiritual sword rank, when they met the ancestral dragon sword, they would usually be sliced into two within a few moves. Needless to say, for a sword lady of the famous sword rank like the Yuan Gojin Jian, it was already a miracle that she could not survive the first move. To be able to survive the second move was already a miracle. As for now, blocking more than 10 strikes from the ancestral dragon without a trace of injury, this couldn't be described as a miracle anymore. Could it be that the Yu King Gojian sword is different from the information? She's not made of bronze, but of some extremely precious material? Seeing this, the audience started to wonder about the material of the Yu King Gojian sword. Only this could explain why the Yu King didn't have a single crack when facing the ancestral dragon's attack. When did I become so strong? Not only did the audience not understand, even the Yu King himself didn't understand what had happened to him. The Yu King knew his body well. His sword was indeed made of bronze. No matter what, it couldn't be a match for the ancestral dragon sword, made of rare materials like the ancestral dragon horn. When he blocked the first strike, he thought he was going to break. He even blamed Gohan for being heartless and unscrupulous. Even now, the Yu King was still confused. He couldn't understand why he could face the ancestral dragon head-on. The Yu King's figure was enchanting and elegant. This was the first time the military governor had released his sword Maiden. Before this, the military governor had always fought as the sword master. Why did he suddenly release the Yu King Gojian sword? Could it be that the military governor planned to let the sword Maiden fight herself? That's right. It seems that before entering the competition, the military governor did something strange to my sword Scar. Suddenly, the Yu King remembered something that happened before the battle started. There were still 10 minutes before the battle started, but Gohan took the Juzi sword that had just been synchronized and ran into a small room with him. He didn't know what strange thing he did to the sword Scar in his Zifu. After that, the Yu King felt that there was a different and indescribable feeling in his body, as if he was connected to something. However, the competition was about to start, and the moment Gohan finished, he hurried to the battlefield. Then, there were endless battles. The Yu King didn't even have the chance to ask and gradually forgot about it. Only now did the Yu King suddenly realize that Gohan must have done something to him at that time. What did you do to me? Taking advantage of the gap in the battle, the Yu King asked Gohan. I fused your power with the power of the Juzi sword. Gohan waved his hand and was sent flying by the ancestral dragon again. The fusion that Gohan mentioned was actually using the Yin-Yang sword art on the Juzi sword and the Yu King Gojian sword, making the Juzi sword and the Yu King sword become one, just like the Doyu sword and the Heavenly sword. Although on the surface, Gohan was only using the Yu King Gojian sword to fight, in reality, the power of the Juzi sword had already fused into the Yu King Gojian sword's body. The attributes and characteristics of the two sword maidens were intertwined. But even if I fuse with a famed sword maiden, I can't block the ancestral dragon sword's attack. The Yu King still didn't understand after hearing Gohan's explanation. However, Gohan didn't directly answer the Yu King's question. Instead, he sent the attribute map of the Juzi sword into the Yu King's mind. Juzi sword material, Fusang wood origin, innate, spring and autumn unique, realm, famed sword rarity, 9th grade sword Dao, demonic Dao characteristic. Juzi sword doesn't have any emotions. Any spiritual type skills have no effect on Juzi sword. Awaken form, sword wielder, military governor deep sword mark, not deep damage, sword maiden form 1. 52/sword form 1. 52 defense, sword maiden form 2. 88/sword form 2. 88 agility, sword maiden form 0. 41/sword form 0. 41 protective shield reset time, 360 seconds. Durability, 100% synchronization and coordination sword element requirement, 10,000 synchronization and coordination time, 10 minutes initial sword mark engraving. After the initial sword mark is engraved, sword wielder's sword element points will be increased by 10,000 points. Sword mark contract. After synchronization, the sword wielder and the Juzi sword will have the characteristic of being sharp. When the Juzi sword is in sword form, the Juzi sword will never break from attacks below flood level Yuan Ko. Basic skill, Ancestor of Mo, within 20 seconds, for every demonic sword maiden within range, the Juzi sword's attributes will be increased by 10% to 60%. Maximum of 20. Cooldown time, 1 minute. Passive skill, Ancestor of Technology. All scientific products can automatically repair themselves, 20% every 10 seconds. Advanced skill, Benevolent Non-Offensive. The Juzi sword can make an opponent enter a benevolent state, losing the desire to attack all surrounding enemies. Depending on the enemy's level and the sword element of the sword wielder, lasts from 1 second to permanent. Cooldown time, 10 minute. Ultimate skill, Mechanical Holy Beast. The Juzi sword can randomly summon a mechanical black tortoise, mechanical baihu, mechanical vermilion bird, and mechanical azure dragon. The mechanical black tortoise has 10 times the defensive energy of the Juzi sword and can absorb all damage received by the sword wielder. The mechanical baihu has 10 times the attack power of the Juzi sword and has a guaranteed hit effect. The mechanical vermilion bird has 10 times the agility of the Juzi sword and also has an area of effect fire attack skill. The mechanical azure dragon has 3 times the attributes of the Juzi sword and can tear through the void and banish the opponent into the void. Sword mark restraint. Demonic Juzi. When fighting with a demonic sword maiden or under the same sword wielder, all the attributes of a demonic sword maiden are increased by 100%. Confucian Nemesis. When fighting with a Confucian sword maiden or under the same sword wielder, all the attributes of a Confucian sword maiden are decreased by 100%. Fusang Mythology. When fighting with a Fusang sword maiden or under the same sword wielder, all the attributes of a Fusang sword maiden are increased by 100%. Guhan would not have to worry about the sword lady's body being damaged in battle. He could fight without any worries, just like when he was fighting with the ancestral dragon sword. Did you see Juzi sword stats, so you dared to fight an immortal sword level sword wielder? King Yu asked Gohan secretly. Gohan blinked. From the lottery ticket that Gohan had bought, it could be seen that Gohan had bet on being number 1 in the spirit sword level. This meant that his inner limit was at most to defeat number 1 in the spirit sword level. He didn't even think about fighting an immortal sword level sword wielder. However, when he synchronized the Juzi sword and saw its attributes, he immediately told the others that he would not use a famed sword-grade sword lady under the celestial sword tier. It was because the attributes of the Juzi sword were so heaven-defying that after being enhanced by the yin-yang sword art, Guhan actually dared to arm wrestle with the celestial sword lady. Ignoring everything else, just based on this unbreakable stat, Gohan dared to fight an immortal sword-level sword lady with his swordsmanship. Of course, Gohan also knew that the gap between him and an immortal sword-level sword wielder was too big. His chances of winning were still very slim. As long as the immortal sword-level sword wielder was shameless enough to hide in the void and attack Gohan through the void, Gohan would have no chance of winning. Hiding in the void was not stealth. After all, stealth was still in this space. Gohan could feel the opponent's murderous intent and subtle sounds to determine the opponent's location. But if he hid in the void, if the opponent put a knife to his neck, Gohan wouldn't be able to sense it at all. Unless Gohan could become a spirit sword-level sword wielder and have some void perception ability, he wouldn't be able to predict the attack from the void. Originally, Gohan's plan was to spend a little sword essence oral solution to fight 300 rounds with the immortal sword-level sword wielder, absorb their experience, and further improve his strength. Then, he would surrender and end this challenge. However, the appearance of the ancestral dragon sword gave Gohan a reason to continue fighting. This was because Tianjin didn't have 1,000,000 quarks of sword essence. Although he had synchronized with the immortal sword-level sword lady, he also didn't have the ability to enter the void. Even the ancestral dragon couldn't enter the void. This gave Gohan an excellent opportunity. For Gohan, an immortal sword-level sword wielder without the ability to enter the void was just a little more difficult to deal with than a spirit sword-level sword wielder. Logically speaking, the swordsmanship of the ancestral dragon sword was not very powerful. It could even be said that it was a little bad. After all, the ancestral dragon had used his own body to fight his enemies all his life. As for the swords invented by humans, the ancestral dragon sword itself didn't care about them at all. This led to the ancestral dragon sword's swordsmanship being terrible. He only knew the most basic movements such as swinging, chopping, slashing, stabbing, and flicking. There was no difference between him and a newbie who had practiced swordsmanship for 1 or 2 years. With this kind of swordsmanship, Gohan could abuse it however he wanted. However, the ancestral dragon's physical fitness was too strong. In terms of pure strength and speed, he was much stronger than Gohan. There was once a martial arts expert who said that 1 part of speed was equivalent to 3 parts of swordsmanship. In other words, as long as you were fast enough, you could defeat all swordsmanship. This was the situation that Gohan was facing. Ancestral dragon sword's swordsmanship was terrible, but his extremely fast speed caused Gohan to repeatedly parry and be sent flying. Unfortunately, because the Juzi sword had just been synchronized, there was no deep sword mark at all. Therefore, other than the basic skills, the other skills were not activated. Otherwise, if Gohan used the ultimate skill of the Juzi sword and borrowed the power of the 4 sacred beasts, he might be able to find an opportunity to counterattack. Gohan could only resist and could not find an opportunity to counterattack. On the other side, the ancestral dragon sword, which had a violent nature, became even more violent. 10 minutes had passed, but it still did not win against a small famed sword wielder. This was a great humiliation. It's all this stupid sword's fault. Why do I have to use a sword? Although the ancestral dragon was a sword mistress, she did not like swords. Otherwise, she would have learned some decent swordsmanship after fighting for more than 1,000 years. The ancestral dragon hated swordsmanship very much. She preferred to fight with the body of a dragon. Therefore, the ancestral dragon took a step back and gave up on attacking. She went to Tianjin, who was watching from the side. She grabbed Tianjin's neck and roared, "My good grandson, listen to me. I want to transform into the ancestral dragon's true body." When Tianjin heard the name of the ancestral dragon's true body, his legs turned to jelly. His eyes and nose squeezed together. He forced a smile and said, "Grandma ancestral dragon, my sword essence has not reached 1,000,000 quarks, so I can't leave a deep sword mark. I can't use my ultimate skill to let you transform into the ancestral dragon's true body. I see that you have suppressed the military governor. As long as you continue fighting, you will definitely win. Why do you need the ancestral dragon's true body?" I want your ancestral dragon's true body. Why are you talking so much nonsense? Can't you use the ancestral dragon's true body without 1,000,000 quarks? Condense the true dragon's blood yourself. Otherwise, don't blame me for taking it myself. The ancestral dragon scolded. "Great-grandmother, I'm begging you. I'll lose 300,000 quarks of sword essence for every drop of true dragon blood. I'm begging you. I've saved for 10 years to accumulate 300,000 quarks of sword essence." "Great-grandmother," Skyquake begged as tears streamed down his face. Slap. The ancestral dragon slapped Tianjin's face and kicked him to the ground. You useless thing. It's just 300,000 quarks. Great-grandmother will help you get them in half a year. If you don't force the true dragon's blood out today, don't expect me to fight for you for the rest of your life. Do you understand? Yes. 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 Tianjin was helpless. In the face of the ancestral dragon's threat, Tianjin really had no ability to resist. His current strength was completely supported by the ancestral dragon sword. If the ancestral dragon sword didn't come out to fight, Tianjin would be completely finished. Helpless, Tianjin could only tearfully spend 300,000 quarks to force out a drop of true dragon's blood and give it to the ancestral dragon. The ancestral dragon sword's big move allowed him to transform into the ancestral dragon true body and fight for 10 minutes. The ancestral dragon true body was a true desolate level Yuan Ko. One could imagine how terrifying this ability was. Originally, this was a big move that required the sword wielder to have a first-grade sword mark to activate. However, there was another way to activate the ancestral dragon true body, and that was to use the true dragon's blood. In reality, the sword wielder could consume 3 years of his lifespan to condense a drop of true dragon's blood. Even if the ancestral dragon sword didn't have a profound sword mark, it would still be able to use its big move. In the game, it was naturally impossible to force the sword wielder's lifespan, so it was changed to using 300,000 quarks of sword essence to condense the true dragon's blood. 300,000 quarks of sword essence, for some of the weaker spirit sword level sword wielder, was equivalent to 10 years of accumulation. 10 years of hard work was gone in an instant. It was normal for Tianjin to be unwilling to condense the true dragon's blood. Unfortunately, he had such a great-grandmother. Tianjin had no other choice. Not good. The other party is going to transform into the ancestral dragon true body. Once it succeeds, I will definitely lose. When Gohan saw the way the ancestral dragon forced Tianjin, he knew that the other party was going to use the ancestral dragon true body. This was simply a bug-like skill. Gohan didn't expect that the ancestral dragon would actually force his sword wielder to consume 300,000 quarks to condense the true dragon's blood. Looks like I can only use that method. Gohan's expression changed. He threw King Yu into the air, and King Yu's sword lady form appeared. What? Do you want me to fight with the ancestral dragon? I can't beat her. As soon as King Yu came out, he asked in confusion and annoyance. King Yu, close your eyes. Before King Yu could understand what was going on, he was pulled into Gohan's embrace and kissed King Yu's lips. Ooh. King Yu whimpered. This wasn't only because he was forcefully kissed by Gohan. More importantly, under the cover of his clothes, one of Gohan's hands quickly reached into King Yu's clothes and grabbed a lump of crispy chicken. In public, in broad daylight, it was too exciting. Chapter 648. What are you trying to do? King Yu transmitted a thought to Gohan through the sword mark. This thought also contained King Yu's shyness. The way to defeat ancestral dragon. Gohan replied dryly. When King Yu heard this, he felt a burst of anger for no reason. He opened his mouth and bit hard on Gohan's lips that were on his lip. A sharp pain traveled from the nerves on Gohan's lips to Gohan's mind. Soon after, Gohan's power erupted. It's coming. Gohan's hand reached deep into King Yu's thigh and grabbed the hilt of his sword. Before King Yu could react, he was turned into a sword by Gohan. At this moment, military governor was still military governor, but vaguely, he didn't seem to be the original Gohan. On the other side, ancestral dragon also swallowed the true dragon blood in Skyquake's body. Her young girl's body suddenly turned into a wriggling Chinese dragon. Chinese dragons were the supreme species in the world. They had horns like a deer, head like a camel, eyes like a rabbit, neck like a snake, abdomen like a crab, scales like a fish, claws like an eagle, palms like a tiger, ears like a cow. They could be big or small, they could rise or hide. When they were big, they could breathe out mist. When they were small, they could hide. When they were small, they could hide. When they were high, they could soar in the universe. When they were low, they could hide. Ancestral Dragon was different from ordinary dragons. Ancestral Dragon was the ancestor of all dragons, the ancestor of all dragons in the world. Among his descendants, there were only 5-clawed golden dragons at most. However, Ancestral Dragon had 9 claws. It was the only 9-clawed golden dragon in the world. Furthermore, other dragon heads had 2 dragon horns, while the Ancestral Dragon only had 1 dragon horn. This meant that there was no other dragon head that was second to none. The Ancestral Dragon borrowed the power of the true dragon's blood and successfully transformed into the Ancestral Dragon's body. His physique was more than 10 times stronger than when he was in the sword Maiden form. Ancestral Dragon was extremely excited. With a dragon roar, she grabbed at Gohan with lightning speed. Now that her physical fitness had increased tenfold, her speed naturally increased tenfold as well. Dealing with Gohan had become a very simple matter. However, what Ancestral Dragon imagined didn't happen. Ancestral Dragon's claw went down, but it still missed. Ancestral Dragon looked down and found that the military governor was actually beside his claw, but his claw miraculously missed. I must have been too excited just now. That's why I missed. Ancestral Dragon thought of a reasonable explanation for herself. This time, her 2 claws grabbed at the military governor from 2 different directions at the same time to ensure that nothing would go wrong. Unexpectedly, the moment the Ancestral Dragon's claws moved, the military governor dodged to the side in a strange manner, evading the Ancestral Dragon's attack in advance. This is impossible. Ancestral Dragon was a little crazy. The audience was surprised to find that even though the Ancestral Dragon's sword had transformed into the Ancestral Dragon form, it still couldn't do anything to Gohan. No matter how Ancestral Dragon's claws tried to grab him, the military governor was slippery and couldn't be caught no matter what. Later, the audience slowed down the video by 200 times and realized that every inch of Gohan's skin seemed to have learned to dodge. He completely grasped the timing of the Ancestral Dragon's attack to dodge. It was as if he could control every cell in his body. The Ancestral Dragon was a desolate grade Yuan Ko. The military governor could actually dodge the Ancestral Dragon's attack. Didn't this mean that the military governor already had the ability to fight against the desolate grade Yuan Ko? Of course, this was impossible. How could the military governor be a match for the desolate grade Yuan Ko? The military governor could dodge the Ancestral Dragon's attack because the current Ancestral Dragon wasn't the real Ancestral Dragon. It could only be considered a defective product. The real desolate grade Yuan Ko Ancestral Dragon had countless god powers. Each god power could make the military governor go see King Yama immediately. However, the transformed Ancestral Dragon didn't have any of these god powers. Even in terms of power and speed, it only inherited less than 1/30th of the Ancestral Dragon. After the Ancestral Dragon's sword transformed, the Ancestral Dragon's power was closely related to the sword wielder's power. If an Emperor sword wielder used this ability, the Ancestral Dragon's sword could even recover 100% of the Ancestral Dragon's power. However, if a spirit sword wielder forced out the blood of a true dragon, the effect would naturally be greatly reduced. Therefore, the Ancestral Dragon's sword couldn't use any god powers. It could only use the simplest form of hand-to-hand combat to fight Gohan. The Ancestral Dragon's sword's original plan wasn't wrong. Although she couldn't use god powers after the Ancestral Dragon transformation, her power and speed would increase by 10 times. She could definitely easily crush the military governor. However, she didn't expect that her Ancestral Dragon's sword could transform into the Ancestral Dragon and that Gohan could use the magical Green Lotus White Root Body ability. The Green Lotus White Root Body could increase the military governor's control of his body by more than 100 times. It allowed Gohan to control his body's potential to the limit. He barely dodged the ancestral Gragon's attack. The Blue Lotus White Lotus body was the first sword of the Blue Lotus three swords, but it could not be used as he wished. When the host touched the back of Gohan's hand just now, he directly increased his tactile sensations by 100 times. This caused Gohan to subconsciously slap the host and send him flying. "Damn it, what bad luck!" The host cursed and then said angrily, "Mr. Military Governor, your next opponent is the sword wielder of the Legend of Sword and Fairy group. After the previous battle, you now have a total of 188,000 quarks of sword essence liquid. The prize for the first place of the Legend of Sword and Fairy group is 320,000 quarks of sword essence liquid. May I ask how many quarks of sword essence liquid you would like to use as the wager for the next round?" Seeing that Gohan had defeated a sword wielder who was half a Legend of Sword and Fairy, the host naturally thought that the military governor should continue the competition. Anyway, he was already used to the military governor's continuous creation of miracles. "I give up." Gohan's voice was a little weak and shaky. "All right, according to the quarks of sword essence you have, your next opponent is." The host only realized something halfway through his sentence. He turned to look at the military governor strangely. "Mr. Military Governor? Did I hear you correctly? What did you say?" "I said I give up. I give up on continuing the challenge." This time, it seemed like Gohan could no longer control his tongue. His voice was constantly shaky, as though something was about to explode from his body. "Mr. Military Governor, actually, you can continue the challenge. If you are not interested, you can just use tens of thousands of quarks of sword essence liquid and Legend of Sword and Fairy level experts." The host still wanted to persuade him, but he did not expect the military governor to suddenly stare at him with a pair of bloodshot eyes. Word by word, as though he was suppressing his anger, he said, "Give me my prize. I want to give up." "All right, I understand." The host waved his hand, and all the quarks of sword essence liquid that Gohan had won appeared in front of Gohan. Gohan waved his hand, and the quarks of sword essence liquid entered his dimensional pocket. Then, the next moment, Gohan left the competition and exited the arena. "Mr. Admiral, you should at least say a few words before you leave." Seeing that the military governor had left, the host wanted to cry but had no tears. However, no matter what, the military governor had created an unprecedented record in this competition. Even the exciting battles between sword and emperor sword wielders could no longer attract the attention of the players. After the competition ended, the military governor's name once again appeared in every corner of the forum. All the posts were discussing the military governor's ability and analyzing the recording of the military governor's battle. The more the players analyzed, the more they felt that the military governor's ability was terrifying. The strongest sword wielder in the history of Sword Lady Online. This title that countless players could only dream of but could not attain seemed to be placed on the military governor's head. What was Gohan doing now? Why was he in such a hurry to leave the competition? Chapter 649. The reason why Gohan was in such a hurry to leave the competition was because he could no longer control the power in his body. I wonder if everyone still remembers the first time Gohan used the Green Lotus three swords in real life. It was in Yeyang Fortress. In order to clear the Yuan Ko in the fortress, Gohan had no choice but to activate Green Lotus White Root Body. As a result, when he eliminated all the Yuan Ko, Gohan escaped into a small room and completed his first blood. It was the same in the game. In reality, after Gohan lost his first blood, he could control Green Lotus White Root Body more freely. But in the game, Gohan still had his first blood. Therefore, after using Green Lotus White Root Body, Gohan had no choice but to enter a situation that he had encountered in reality. To be honest, Gohan didn't expect this. This was completely out of Gohan's expectations. After the host was sent flying by Gohan, Gohan's green lotus white root body was automatically removed and replaced by endless desire. If it weren't for the last bit of rationality, Gohan would have almost taken off his clothes on the spot. Therefore, Gohan didn't have any intention of challenging the legend of the Sword and Fairy team. After retrieving his reward, Gohan left the arena and returned to his bedroom in the Sword Tomb at a godlike speed. "Military Governor, you pervert. What's wrong with you? We have to settle what you did to me just now." The moment he returned to his room, King Yu was freed. King Yu's first reaction was naturally to settle the score with Gohan for teasing him in the arena. However, he didn't expect that before he finished speaking, he would be pushed onto the bed by a naked figure. "You pervert, you actually took off your clothes? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to do to me?" The King of Yu was horrified to find that the military governor had taken off all of his clothes. The thing under him that was as hard as an iron rod was pressed against his lower body. 3,000 words have been omitted below. Looking at Gohan, who was sleeping like a baby, and thinking of the madness just now, King Yu felt a wave of pain and fear. "You bastard, pervert beast! It's been more than 1,000 years, and you've taken my first time." The angry King Yu fiercely twisted the military governor's arm, causing his flesh to swell. However, Gohan was still sleeping soundly without any reaction. As an excellent sword master, it was rare for him to sleep so soundly. It seemed like the battle just now really exhausted and refreshed Gohan. King Yu hugged Gohan's arm and rested his head on Gohan's chest as he muttered weakly, "Despicable thing, why didn't I resist and let you succeed?" As a fragment of King Yu's consciousness, the sword lady in the game wasn't completely controlled by the swordsman. Thinking of this, King Yu felt a wave of annoyance. Since Gohan was destined to belong to the real world, then what was the fragment of his consciousness in the game? An inflatable doll? Or the female lead of an AR game? When are you going to synchronize with my main body? King Yu stuck her head out and looked at Gohan very seriously. Gohan's hand that was buttoning his shirt trembled, and he quickly replied, "Don't worry, I'll definitely find you in reality in a month or 3 months. 1 more month. So slow." King Yu retracted her head. She seemed to have forgotten that 1 month was the fastest time. In reality, she might have to wait for 3 months. Scram back to reality. "You were so fierce last night that my lower part hurt a lot. I want to sleep." Gohan returned to the living room of the Sword Tomb and placed all the sword essence oral liquid he had harvested on the table. "After drinking all of it, I can increase my sword essence by 180,000 quarks and become a spirit sword wielder in reality?" Seeing the table full of sword essence oral liquid and thinking about the meaning of the sword essence oral liquid, Gohan felt that it was inconceivable. It was as unrealistic as a dream. Of course it's not that exaggerated. Suddenly, a petite figure sat on Gohan's lap. Tamono Kakashi rubbed her butt against Gohan's body and asked meaningfully, "Did you feel good last night? Are you spying on me?" Gohan frowned. "Please, this game is like my body. You guys are in my body, hee. How could I not know?" Tamono Kakashi rubbed against him again and changed to a more comfortable position. "Why did you come to find me? Don't tell me it's just to ask this kind of boring question?" Gohan grabbed Tamono Kakashi from his body. She rubbed against him twice, which made little Gohan raise his head again. Ever since he broke his vows, Gohan found that his body seemed to be looking forward to this kind of boring mating behavior. "Of course, I'm not concerned about this kind of boring thing." Tamono Kakashi stood on the table where Gohan had placed a large pile of sword essence oral fluid. She said very seriously, "I'm here to remind you that you can drink at most 10,000 quarks a month, or else you'll regret it." "I can only drink 10,000 quarks a month? Why?" Gohan knocked on the table rhythmically. "I know that your body is very special and can convert 100% of the sword essence oral fluid, but do you think the converted sword essence fell from the sky? In fact, the sword essence is originally hidden in your body. It just needs a special kind of power to stimulate it, and the game is the way to stimulate this power. Your body can stimulate 10,000 quarks a month at most, and that's the limit. Once you exceed this limit, a certain part of your body will die, and you can forget about being a normal man in the future. Tomono Kakaze stuck out her tongue. I'm done talking. I escaped in secret. I'm leaving, think about it yourself. After saying that, Tomono Kakaze disappeared. She's really a good person. She specially came over to remind me of this. Gohan looked at the sword essence oral fluid with a gloomy expression, hesitating whether he should believe Tomono Kakaze's words. Gohan vaguely felt that the problem here was probably not as simple as Tomono Kakaze said. There must be a big problem hidden here, which was why Tomono Kakaze took such a big risk and personally came out to stop him from taking the sword essence oral fluid. Forget it, I'll be more cautious. Gohan thought about it and put most of the sword essence oral fluid into his dimensional pocket, leaving only 10,000 quarks outside. He then drank it in one gulp. In the character's attribute panel, there were immediately 10,000 quarks of sword essence. The effect was immediate. Chapter 650. Shihua? Lu Yin? Gohan woke up from the game and stretched. He found that Lu Shihua and Lu Yin were not in the room. He didn't know where they went. Gohan shook his head. He planned to explain some things to Lu Shihua and Lu Yin, but since they were not there, there was nothing to say. He returned to the game. King Yu was just done by him. She must be eager for him to accompany her. I should accompany her more. After my body recovers, I'm afraid I won't have so much time. But maybe because he was too excited, Gohan shook his head violently and shook the helmet to the side of his head. So Gohan reached out to grab the game helmet beside his head. When Gohan grabbed the helmet in his hand and was about to put it on again, Gohan was stunned. His hand actually grabbed the helmet. My hand can move? Gohan threw the helmet aside and shook his hand crazily as if he was possessed. That's right, Gohan's hand returned to normal. But it wasn't just his hand that returned to normal. Then, Gohan was surprised to find that he had regained control of his whole body. Although his body was still in pain, he had regained control of his body. Gohan could sit up freely on the bed. Great! Gohan was excited. He immediately wanted to get out of bed and walk, but as soon as he left the bed, he staggered and fell to the ground. His face was covered in dust. Because his legs hadn't been exercised for a long time, they didn't listen to him. But it didn't matter. As long as he practiced more, he could return to normal. Ha ha. Although he fell to the ground, Gohan lost his mind and laughed. The moment he fell, his lower body felt pressured. This was the feeling of little Gohan being pressured. Gohan's little Gohan had returned. Gohan had returned to the state of a man. Gohan immediately held onto the edge of the bed and walked all the way to the only mirror in Lu Shihua's house. When he saw that the person in the mirror was indeed Gohan, and was no longer Gu Xian Yuan, Gohan finally let out a sigh of relief. The damned state was finally over. Military Governor, why are you in the real world? Where's Master? Where did Master go? At this point, Ju Zi had also transformed from a sword into a sword lady. She walked out of her bed and stared at Gu Han in astonishment. She felt that it was very strange. Why was a character in the game here in real life? Where was the owner of Gu Han's fate? I'm your master. Gohan knocked on Ju Zi's head. Don't tell anyone about Gu Xian Yuan. Are you really my master? Ju Zi came close to Gohan's hand and sniffed it. She waved her hand and said, No, my master doesn't smell like this. Ju Zi, squat down. Gohan glared at Ju Zi and gave a forceful order through Zifu. Thus, Ju Zi squatted down with a confused look. Now do you believe that I'm your master? Gohan knocked on Ju Zi's head again. I believe. Master, can you not use forceful orders on me in the future? Ju Zi will listen to you. Moreover, a strange man was sitting on the ground of his house. He sat cross-legged with his hands clasped together, as if he was cultivating in a game. "Who are you? Why are you in my house? I'm going to call the police," Lu Shihua asked vigilantly. However, she soon saw that Juzi was quietly guarding the man's side. She felt a little safer. Since Juzi didn't do anything here, it might mean that this man was not a bad person. "Master is cultivating. We can't disturb him." Juzi walked to Lu Shihua's side and said dryly, "Master? Isn't the owner of your Juzi sword Miss Xianyuan? When did another master appear?" Lu Shihua already knew a lot about the sword lady. He felt that Juzi's answer was a little strange. Juzi shut up because she didn't know how to explain. Just now, Gohan had already told her not to say anything about Gu Xianyuan. She couldn't disobey the order and be bound by the mandatory order. Lu Shihua seemed to feel that this man was not too dangerous. He tiptoed to his side and carefully looked at the other's appearance. He always felt that he had seen him somewhere. It was a very familiar person, but Lu Shihua couldn't remember who he was. "What's wrong? Don't you even recognize me?" Gohan opened his eyes. The meridians in his legs had been restored. He stood up from the ground. Although there was still some discomfort, it was no longer a problem for him to stand. "You are Master Military Governor?" Hearing Gohan's voice, a muscle in Lu Shihua's brain twitched. She suddenly thought of something. If she left a scar on the face of the man in front of her, wouldn't it be the same as the military governor's? "It's me." Gohan nodded. "Master Military Governor, it's really you. Why are you here?" Lu Shihua shouted in surprise and went to Gohan's side. She was very excited. She didn't expect that the military governor would appear in front of her at this time. This was really a surprise. "Well, I'm here to pick up my Xianyuan." Gohan smiled and said, "It's not proper for her to live here all the time, so I took her back home. I stayed here to see you, to thank you for taking care of Xianyuan, and to move you to a new home. You can't live in such a place." Gohan smiled and said, "You can't live here. It's okay. Miss Xianyuan has also helped us a lot." Lu Shihua smiled and then her face changed. "Master, what did you just say? You want to change our home?" "Yes, this is not a place where the disciple of the military governor should live. You can't live here. I'll change your home." Gohan glanced at Lu Shihua and asked, "What's wrong? You don't want to leave this home?" "Well, although this place is broken, it's a lifetime of memories for me and little Een." Lu Shihua nodded and then bowed to Gohan. "Thank you, Master Military Governor, but Shihua doesn't want to move. Shihua doesn't want to trouble Master. Master has helped me a lot. Memories are memories. Don't let them entangle your future." Gohan touched Lu Shihua's head. The comfort brought by Gohan's big hand almost made Lu Shihua want to lean into Gohan's arms. "After I settle down, you and little Een will live in my house in a few days. That way, it will be more convenient for me to guide you in your training in the real world. You are my disciple, my helper. I want to train you into the best sword wielder. Trust me," Gohan said gently. Lu Shihua was intoxicated by her words. "Wait, I'm going to live with Master? Live in the same space? Or in reality?" Lu Shihua suddenly felt a burst of excitement and happiness fill his whole body. He couldn't wait to live in it immediately. "Damn, Lu Shihua, what the hell are you thinking?" Lu Shihua's face turned red. Some strange thoughts were thrown out of his mind. "By the way, what did you say when you came in? You asked me to save little Een. What happened to little Een?" Gohan remembered Lu Shihua's shout when he entered the door. "Oh no, Master, can you save little Een? He was captured by the people of the Sword Council. They said that they want him to do hard labor outside the city. Master, please save him." Lu Shihua suddenly remembered his original purpose, and said in a panic. Chapter 651. Lu Yin was indeed arrested by the Sword Council, but after hearing the reason for Lu Yin's arrest, Gohan didn't really want to save this guy. So what was the reason? It was like this. Because Lu Yin sympathized with Gohan's beheading incident, he joined a QQ group called For Freedom, Democracy, Fraternity, and Harmony, severely punished the murderer Gohan, and became an active member in the group. As a result, yesterday, the owner of the group, who rarely showed his face, suddenly encouraged members to participate in a large-scale rally and demonstration tomorrow, demanding that Gohan be severely punished. Naturally, Lu Yin joined the demonstration. Lu Shihua was worried, so he chased after him as well. According to Lu Shihua, the demonstration gathered a lot of people, about 70,000 to 80,000 people, surrounding the entire temporary service center for sword bearers. However, not long after, thousands of police officers suddenly rushed out of the temporary service center for sword bearers. Without saying a word, they began to arrest people, beat them, and lock them in jail. About 500 to 600 people were arrested. Because Lu Yin was standing at the front, he shouted the loudest, so naturally, he was arrested by the police. Lu Shihua had no choice but to run home, hoping that Gu Xianyuan could use the identity of a sword bearer to release his brother. After listening to Lu Shihua's narration, Gohan didn't know how to treat this idiot Lu Yin. This guy was arrested because he protested, and now he was hoping that Gohan would rescue him? This was really ridiculous. If possible, Gohan didn't want to care about Lu Yin's life at all. But unfortunately, Lu Yin's sister was Lu Shihua. For the sake of this precious disciple, Gohan had to eat this fly. However, Gohan was very curious. Since Lu Shihua saw his real face, why didn't Lu Shihua recognize that he was Gohan? It seemed that his missing person notice was played 30 times a day on TV. Thinking of this, Gohan took out half a mask from his dimensional pocket and put it on his face. Now that the public was so disgusted with Gohan, it was not appropriate for him to reveal his real face. I don't want anyone to recognize me as the military governor, so I need this. Gohan looked at the puzzled Lu Shihua and said, I understand. I'll arrange everything. Don't worry, Lu Yin will be fine. After Gohan finished speaking, he staggered out of Lu Shihua's house. This was the first time he had left this room in more than 10 days. Seeing the sunlight that he hadn't seen for a long time, Gohan felt very emotional. Master, what happened to your leg? Lu Shihua could tell that there was something wrong with the military governor's leg. He immediately went up to support Gohan's body and asked with concern. I'm a little obsessed with cultivation, Gohan answered vaguely. Hearing Gohan's words, Lu Shihua immediately took advantage of the situation and said, Master, then Shihua will take you. Where are you going now? To the temporary sword bearers service center? Are you worried that I won't save your brother? Gohan looked at Lu Shihua with a faint smile. Lu Shihua stuck out his tongue and blushed. I'll go to the sword bearers service center later. Come with me to pick them up now. I don't know how these two little guys are doing. Gohan sighed. He had already sensed Qin Pin and Gu Yun's location. These two cute little guys hadn't gone to find Lu Lei. He didn't know where they were wandering. It was really hard for them. With Lu Shihua's support, Gohan slowly walked toward Qingpin's location. When they crossed Toad Street, passers-by saw Lu Shihua supporting Gohan. They couldn't help but cover their mouths and smile. They kept pointing at Lu Shihua and Gohan, as if they found something very interesting. Some young boys were unhappy when they saw this scene. They looked at the military governor angrily as if they wanted to kill Gohan. If Lu Shihua hadn't glared at them so that they wouldn't dare to act rashly, they would have rushed up to them. They seemed to have misunderstood something. Lu Shihua lowered her head shyly. I'll give them a good scolding later, and then explain it to them clearly. Explain what? There's no need to explain it to these people. Gohan glanced at these hot-blooded youths. Your world is already different from theirs. From now on, you are people of two different worlds. There's no need for you to interact with them anymore. Hearing Gohan's words, Lu Shihua's hand trembled. He asked tentatively, "Do sword-bearers and ordinary people really have to be separated like this? Didn't we sword-bearers come from the group of ordinary people?" The emperor before the apocalypse was also an ordinary person. However, once he became the emperor, could he still be an ordinary person? Gohan said calmly, "It's not that sword-bearers can't be the same as ordinary people. It's just that sword-bearers are different from ordinary people. You have to understand this. We shoulder the survival of mankind, so we are different from them. We need to fight constantly and sacrifice constantly. All they needed to do was to survive here. This was the most essential difference. Responsibility determines status. The more we enjoy, the more we have to bear. You're no longer the Lu Shihua of the past." Gohan withdrew his hand from Lu Shihua's and smiled. "My legs are almost healed. I can walk on my own." "Oh," Lu Shihua replied. Sure enough, Gohan could basically walk, although his walking posture was still a little weird. Therefore, Lu Shihua silently followed behind Gohan and didn't say a word. Obviously, she didn't agree with Gohan's argument just now. The two of them walked in silence for a long time. Lu Shihua realized that Gohan had stopped in front of him. He raised his head and found that he was standing in front of a school. The signboard had the words Yangming High School written on it. "I've heard of this place. This seems to be the temporary headquarters of the human sword-bearers during the Great Invasion. Why is there no one here?" Lu Shihua found that the school was empty and couldn't help but ask curiously. "Because most of the students are dead, there's no need for so many schools. So the students went to another well-preserved school," Gohan said as he walked to the school gate. "Wait, the gate here is locked. We can't get in," Lu Shihua said quickly. The school gate was firmly locked by an electronic lock. It was impossible to open it without a fingerprint or password. Unexpectedly, Gohan just touched the gate gently, and the electronic lock suddenly beeped and opened by itself. Gohan walked into the school with Lu Shihua, who was a little confused. The school that Gohan had once visited in a hurry was completely quiet. It was a mess inside. All kinds of teaching equipment were thrown on the ground and piled up with countless garbage everywhere. Gohan knew that this was the trace left behind when Yangming High School served as a temporary headquarters. Probably because they were too lazy to clean up these things, they abandoned Yangming High School and merged the surviving students here into other schools. According to Gohan's feeling, Qingpin and the others were not far from him. He walked with Lu Shihua on the messy field and finally stopped in front of a dormitory building. According to his senses, Qingpin and Gu Yun were in the dormitory building. "Master, what is this thing you brought?" At the gate of the dormitory, Lu Shihua looked at Gohan strangely as he put a cute panda-like bag on his chest. It looked like a bag used to abduct and sell children. "It's used to carry a little kid." Gohan's answer surprised Lu Shihua. He really abducted and sold children. "You wait here and wait for me to come out. You don't have to follow me," Gohan said to Lu Shihua and went straight into the dormitory building. Sure enough, in a room on the first floor of the dormitory building, Gohan found his two cute sword maidens. He took off his mask and found the two cute guys lying on the bed with drool all over their faces. Their clothes were not neatly dressed and were rolled up, revealing a smooth little belly. It was cold to the touch, and it was cold to the touch. Fortunately, they were sword maidens and didn't catch a cold or cough. Otherwise, it would be big trouble. "Oh Gu Yun, I smell Gohan. Gohan is here, I want to eat meat." Qingpin sniffed, then turned around and hugged Gu Yun beside him. He whimpered and added, "I want braised pork. I want to eat fish, not meat." Gu Yun ate Qingpin's finger that was raised to the side of her mouth, and then bit hard. "Ouch, ouch, ouch. I'm going to kill someone and eat Qingpin." Qingpin was in so much pain that his tears flowed out. One of his hands kept shaking, trying to pull his finger out of Gu Yun's iron teeth. But Gu Yun was biting very hard, as if she was nailed to Qingpin's finger. She shook along with Qingpin's small hand and refused to let go. Gohan, help, let go of your stinky sister. Qingpin suddenly jumped into Gohan's arms with Gu Yun, who was biting his finger. Wait, something seemed wrong. For a moment, Qingpin didn't speak and stopped crying. He looked at Gohan in a daze and then patted Gu Yun's head. Stupid dead fish, bite me hard again. I seem to be still in a dream. I bite. Gu Yun was very obedient. She bit hard again with her sharp little teeth. It hurts, but it doesn't seem to work. Qingpin murmured. Okay, you're not dreaming. I'm back. Gohan's eyes were sparkling. He grabbed Qingpin's little neck and stuffed her into the nursery bag that he had prepared. Do you believe that you're not dreaming now? No, I often come here in my dreams. Qingpin poked his head out and sent Gu Yun, who was biting his hand, to Gohan. Stinky Gohan, get your sister down, and I'll believe that you're stinky Gohan. Hey! Gohan stretched out a hand and scratched Gu Yun's little foot. Gu Yun felt itchy and loosened her mouth naturally. Then, she twisted a few times in Gohan's hand like a live fish. She opened her eyes and saw Gohan. Hey Qingpin, bite me. I seem to be dreaming. Gu Yun patted the poor man's face, and the poor man bit down without hesitation. It was a chance to take revenge that was delivered to his doorstep. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.